Tonight we step softly into a room where the oldest stories are not written on paper, but pressed into clay. You stand beneath a quiet museum light, where the glass cases hold small brown tablets. They look humble at first, almost like broken biscuits left too long in the sun. Yet the marks on them are older than most kingdoms, older than most alphabets, older than the grand stone dreams of later empires. Each wedge was made by a reed stylus, pressed by a hand that once belonged to someone breathing, thinking, worrying about bread, taxes, weather, and the gods. In the collections of the British Museum, the University of Pennsylvania Museum, and other major institutions, scholars have spent generations reading these tablets with slow care. Oxford historians and American Assyriologists have confirmed that Sumerian and later Mesopotamian texts preserve some of humanity's earliest written myths. That is the mainstream ground beneath your feet, not a fantasy yet, not a secret door yet, just clay, language, and patient scholarship. Still, the clay has a way of unsettling the mind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows quieter, perhaps you can write where you are listening from and what time it is there. Somewhere. It may be morning, somewhere else. The streets may be asleep. Here, in this slow passage through ancient memory, the hour feels older than clocks. You lean closer to the tablet. The marks do not explain themselves, as they never have. They sit there, thin and angular like tiny bird tracks across dried mud. A museum label may say creation myth, flood story, royal inscription, hymn, offering list, or school exercise. Very polite, very clean. History always looks calmer behind glass, but the deeper question is not polite at all. What did the Sumerians believe had happened before humans stood at the centre of the world? You breathe in the imagined scent of dust, beeswax, and old stone. The air feels still, as if the room itself is listening. Somewhere beyond the glass, beyond the careful labels, there are stories of divine beings who work, complain, descend, govern, shape, and sometimes regret what they have made. The word Anunnaki comes to you through later traditions and modern fascination. In the ancient Mesopotamian world, these beings were connected with divine authority, judgment, and the deep structure of the cosmos. In popular imagination, of course, they have been given stranger costumes. Some fringe writers claim they were visitors from the sky, engineers of life, or rulers of a forgotten biological project. It is a quirky tidbit. Yes, and one that makes university professors sigh into their coffee. But even a sigh can be useful, because the scholarly debate is not whether ancient tablets exist. They do. The debate is how far their language should be taken. Are these creation stories sacred poetry, political theology, symbolic memory, ritual drama, or something stranger preserved in metaphor? A careful Yale scholar might warn that myth is not laboratory evidence. A curious listener might answer, quite reasonably, that myth can still preserve the shape of a fear. You remain in the museum room and the silence thickens. The tablet before you is not a window in the modern sense. It is more like a keyhole. You do not see the whole ancient world through it. You see a sliver, a god's name, a broken line, a phrase about clay, a reference to labour, a flood, a city, a strange creature at the edge of a seal impression. Then the rest is gone, snapped away by time, looters, fire, damp soil, and the ordinary carelessness of centuries. That is the first hidden truth of the tablets. They do not reveal everything. They reveal fragments, and fragments can be more haunting than complete stories. You picture southern Mesopotamia, not as a map in a textbook, but as a breathing place. The rivers move through flat land beneath a wide, hard sky. Reeds rattle in the marshes. Heat trembles above mud-brick walls. Donkeys bray near storehouses. Bare feet press into warm dust. Somewhere, a scribe sits with wet clay on his lap, shaping signs while flies gather near a bowl of beer. He is not writing for you. That almost feels rude. He writes for a temple, a king, a teacher, a god, or perhaps merely for practice. Yet thousands of years later you are here, peering over his shoulder in the dark. His ordinary marks have become extraordinary because time has stripped away his world and left the clay behind. Records from ancient Mesopotamia confirm that writing first developed for practical administration, especially accounting, grain, livestock, and labour. That fact is almost charming in its lack of glamour. Humanity did not begin writing with poetry, at least not at first. It began with lists, sheep, jars, fields, workers, payments, very spiritual, naturally. The gods may have created mankind, but somebody still had to count the barley. And there it is, already. Labour, again and again. Mesopotamian creation stories circle back to work, not merely life, not merely beauty, work, the digging of canals, the feeding of temples, the maintenance of cosmic order. In these stories, humans are not introduced as rulers of nature in the modern heroic style. They appear as beings fitted into a system already ancient, already heavy, already watched. You feel the first outline of the mystery. The tablets do not say, in simple terms, that every species was tested by the Anunnaki, as though the ancient gods kept a neat catalogue of failed creatures. That clean claim belongs more to modern fringe interpretation than to preserved Sumerian text. But the older myths do suggest a layered cosmos, filled with gods, divine servants, strange beings, animals of symbolic force, and humans shaped for a purpose. That is where the story begins to breathe. Not proof, not dismissal, a threshold. You let your attention move from the tablet to the artifacts around it. Cylinder seals rest nearby, no larger than a thumb, yet carved with scenes dense as dreams. Gods sit on thrones, heroes grasp lions, winged beings appear beside sacred trees, bulls lower their heads, serpents coil, fish cloaks cover mysterious sages. The ancient world did not draw a hard wall between animal, human, and divine. Its imagination moved more fluidly, like river water through reeds. A fringe collector might whisper that these are records of experiments. A museum curator might answer that they are religious symbols. A sleeping mind might wonder why the difference feels so thin at midnight. For now, you do not force the clay to confess. That would be unkind, and also poor scholarship. You allow it to remain ancient. You allow it to hold its dignity. The Sumerian texts were not written to satisfy modern curiosity about genetics, aliens, or hidden species. They were written inside a world where gods owned cities, temples consumed wealth, kings claimed cosmic favour, and creation itself could be understood as a form of service. Yet the uneasy question remains, why would a culture imagine humanity as something made, assigned, and placed within a larger order? The glass case reflects a faint shape where your face should be. For a moment, you see yourself hovering over the tablet, half modern and half ghost. You're not so different from the ancient scribe. Really? You also live inside systems you did not create. You also inherit stories older than your questions. You also count your grain, though perhaps now it arrives in bank numbers and glowing screens. The clay waits. It has waited through empire, conquest, burial, excavation, translation, and argument. It has survived kings who thought their names would last forever. It has outlived languages that once filled markets with noise. It sits under museum light, small and cracked, carrying the beginning of a question that has not finished unfolding. Long before recorded history became comfortable, the Sumerians imagined a world already crowded with powers. Long before modern science named species and sorted bones, these texts placed humans among gods, beasts, workers, kings, monsters, and deep waters. Long before anyone asked whether the Anunnaki created other beings first, The tablets were already whispering that mankind was not the opening act. Perhaps that is why they still disturb the quiet. Not because they give a final answer, but because they refuse to make humanity feel simple. They place you inside a much older room, beneath a much darker ceiling, where creation is not a single bright moment. It is a process, a burden, a negotiation, maybe even an experiment. Though that word belongs more to your world than theirs. The museum light hums faintly. Outside, the present continues with all its restless confidence. Inside, the clay remains patient. You look once more at the wedge marks, and they seem almost like seeds pressed into earth, waiting for the right kind of night. And as your breathing slows, the first truth settles gently around you. The tablets do not begin with certainty. They begin with something older, quieter, and far more difficult to put away. They begin with the possibility that before humanity was given its place, the world had already been tried, shaped, watched, and remembered by powers whose names still cling to broken clay. Your mind drifts away from the museum glass and settles over a land without familiar names. There are no palace gates yet, no carved victory scenes, no royal beards arranged in solemn rows. The world lies open beneath a pale sky, wide and unfinished, with marshland breathing in the heat. Reeds bend at the water's edge, mud grips the feet, birds cry over slow channels, and somewhere in the distance, an animal moves through grass that has never heard a human song. This is not the beginning of life in the scientific sense. The earth is already old beyond easy imagining. Stone has cooled, rivers have wandered, plants have spread and failed and returned. Creatures have crawled, hunted, mated, vanished, and left faint traces behind. Yet in the Sumerian imagination, there is another kind of beginning. It is not geology. It is arrangement. It is the moment when the world becomes ordered enough to be governed, named, measured, and used. That is where the ancient mystery grows deeper. The Sumerians did not imagine existence as empty until people arrived. Their stories suggest a crowded universe before humanity enters the scene. Divine powers are already active, waters already matter, earth already waits. Labour already weighs upon beings greater than mankind. Long before recorded history, the world is not blank. It is busy. You can almost hear it. There is the drag of baskets through wet soil. There is the slap of water against canal banks. There is the dull scrape of tools in divine hands, at least as myth allows you to imagine it. The gods are not floating in perfect silence, polished and untouchable. In some Mesopotamian traditions, they work, they dig, they maintain the systems that keep life moving. It is a strangely practical vision of heaven, and honestly, a little unfair. Even the gods cannot escape chores. Mainstream historians at institutions such as Oxford and the University of Chicago have long noted that Mesopotamian myth reflects the social world of the cities that preserved it. Temples required food, workers, records, offerings, and endless organization. The divine realm often mirrors that structure. Gods have ranks. Gods have duties. Gods have households. Gods receive service. Creation, in these stories, is not just wonder. It is administration with thunder behind it. In that ancient atmosphere, humanity has not yet been called forward. The land waits in a state that feels both fertile and uneasy. The rivers bring life, but also danger. The flat soil can bloom with grain, then crack under sun, then drown beneath floodwater. Marsh birds rise like scattered ash. Fish flicker beneath brown channels. Wild cattle pass through the reed beds, leaving heavy prints that fill slowly with water. The world does not need humans in order to exist. That thought is humbling. You stand inside it for a moment, with warm wind moving across your face. The ancient texts invite a feeling modern people often avoid. Humanity is not first. Humanity is not the oldest witness. Humanity arrives into a system already turning, already ruled, already burdened by forces above and beneath. The Anunnaki, in the broad Mesopotamian tradition, belong to that world of divine order. Their exact role shifts across texts and periods, which is inconvenient for tidy theories and wonderful for late-night speculation. Sometimes they are great gods, sometimes they are linked with judgment, sometimes they appear as part of a larger assembly of powers. They are not presented as a modern biological committee with clipboards, though one must admit the image has a certain sleepy, absurd charm. Still, fringe interpretations have leaned heavily into this gap. Some modern writers imagine the Anunnaki standing over early Earth like engineers in a hidden workshop. In these versions, creatures are attempted, altered, discarded, refined. Strange beings emerge from clay, water, animal forms, or divine essence, each one not quite suited to the burden required. It is not what the Sumerian tablets plainly say, yet the idea latches onto something real in the ancient material. Mesopotamian myth does contain a pre-human order, divine labour, creation from mixed substances, and beings that do not fit neat modern categories. That is why the strange reading survives. It feeds on real shadows. A careful scholar might phrase the debate this way. Are these myths describing religious truths in symbolic language, or are they preserving cultural memory of how ancient people understood origins, hierarchy, and difference? Researchers at Yale and other major centres of Near Eastern studies often stress that myths must be read within their scribal, ritual, and literary settings. Yet even within that cautious frame, the emotional force remains. The texts imagine life before humans are structured, inhabited, and tense. You walk through that imagined tension now. The ground is damp. The air smells of river mud, crushed reeds, and the faint sweetness of flowering plants. Insects gather in small clouds. The horizon is low and shimmering. There are no city walls yet in this vision, but there is already pressure. Something in the world is waiting for a role to be filled. Not a throne, a task. In Mesopotamian thought, order is precious because disorder is always near. Canals must be maintained or fields fail. Offerings must be brought or temples fall silent. Names must be spoken or memory decays. The universe is not a machine running without attention. It is more like a house that must be swept forever. Dust returns, weeds return, hunger returns. Someone must keep moving, and before humans that someone may have been divine. The old stories sometimes picture lower gods bearing the strain of work. They dig waterways, they grow weary, they complain, as anyone might after too much mud and not enough appreciation. It is a wonderfully human kind of divine frustration. You can almost picture a god throwing down a basket and muttering that management has lost perspective. The image is amusing, softly. It is also revealing, if humans are eventually made because divine workers cannot continue, then creation becomes an answer to exhaustion. Humanity is not born from pure affection alone. Humanity is formed within a labour crisis. That is not a cruel idea exactly, but it is sobering. You're not merely a child of the cosmos. You're also, in this ancient pattern, a solution to someone else's problem. The wind shifts across the marsh. Now the landscape feels less empty than before. Around you a presence is not fully seen. There are animal bodies moving through reeds. There are divine names not yet spoken aloud. There are powers connected to fresh water, sky, earth, fertility, storm, wisdom, and the underworld. Every part of nature seems inhabited by intention. Nothing is merely scenery. A fish breaks the surface. A bird drops suddenly into the water. A bull snorts in the heat. Later people would carve such creatures into seals, paint them into symbolic patterns, and fold them into myths of guardians, monsters, sages, and gods. But here, in this imagined early world, they are simply alive. They are neighbours in creation before humans have claimed the privilege of explaining them. This is where the idea of species becomes slippery. Modern listeners think in classifications: mammal, reptile, bird, fish, human. The ancient imagination thought in powers, qualities, roles, and sacred associations. A lion was not only an animal, it could mean kingship, danger, divine force, or untamed strength. A serpent was not only a reptile, it could suggest wisdom, renewal, threat, or hidden life. A fish could belong to the deep, to knowledge, to the strange boundary between worlds. So when later fringe voices ask whether the Anunnaki tried to create every species, they're often forcing modern categories onto ancient symbols, yet those symbols still open a door. They show a world where forms matter deeply. Shape is meaning, body is destiny, horns, wings, scales, claws, and human hands all speak in the religious grammar of the time. You pause beside a dark stretch of water. The surface reflects a sky without writing. No scribe has fixed this moment in clay. No king has claimed it. No priest has sung it into temple order. Still, the imagined memory of it lingers behind the tablets, like a dream behind closed eyes. Before humans had names, the world was not silent. Before cities rose from mud brick, the rivers already carried their brown and glittering weight. Before mankind was assigned its work, divine beings in the old stories seem to have known burden, rank, fatigue, and need. And perhaps that is the quiet, unsettling thought at the centre of this ancient darkness. Humanity may not appear as the beloved centre of creation, standing beneath a perfect sunrise. Humanity may enter later, summoned into an older system, shaped not just to live, but to serve, maintain, carry, remember, and obey. The marsh grows dim. The reeds whisper without concern. Somewhere beyond sight, the first city waits inside the mud, not yet built, not yet named, but already possible. Somewhere beyond language, the first human waits inside the mythic clay, not yet breathing, not yet burdened, but already necessary. And above that waiting land, the divine order leans close. Perhaps it watches with patience. Perhaps it wonders what kind of being can bear the weight of the world and still look up at the stars. For a moment, it feels as though the whole ancient world has narrowed to a handful of wet clay. You're not in a palace or a battlefield now. You're near a riverbank where the mud is dark, cool, and heavy with the scent of water. It clings to the fingers. It remembers every footprint. It takes the shape of whatever presses into it, then waits beneath the sun to harden into something more permanent. This is the material of houses, tablets, seals, ovens, bricks, and graves. In Mesopotamian myth, it also becomes the material of human life. The idea is simple at first, almost domestic. The same earth that builds a wall can also build a body. The same mud that preserves a written sign can receive breath, purpose, hunger, and fear. You can understand why ancient people looked at clay and saw possibility. It changes form without protest. It accepts pressure. It holds the mark of a hand after the hand has vanished. That is a quiet miracle. Scholars from major universities such as Oxford, Yale, and Chicago have often noted that Mesopotamian creation traditions connect human origins with clay, divine will, and ritual action. In texts known from later Akkadian versions, especially the story often called Atrahasis, humanity is fashioned to relieve divine labour. The language is not modern biology. It belongs to temple, myth, and sacred imagination. Yet its emotional force is strangely clear. Something earthly is mixed with something divine. Something low is joined to something high. Something made for service begins to breathe. You stand beside the imagined riverbank as a figure gathers clay from the wet edge. Perhaps it is a divine mother, or a birth goddess, or a wise god directing the act. The myths differ in their emphasis, and scholars continue to debate how older Sumerian themes moved into later Akkadian forms. Still, the scene remains powerful. Creation is not clean. It is damp, physical, intimate, and faintly troubling. No shining marble here. No golden staircase descends from the sky. Only mud, only hands, only a substance that stains the skin. In some Mesopotamian accounts, the creation of humans involves the blood or flesh of a slain divine being. That detail is mainstream within the study of these myths, though its interpretation remains debated. Is the divine element meant to explain human intelligence, mortality, guilt, spiritual obligation, or social duty? A Stanford historian might ask what the story reveals about ancient labour systems. A literary scholar might ask why blood makes humanity both sacred and burdened. A sleepy listener may simply wonder why the gods did not choose something tidier. There is the gentle sarcasm of the ancient world again. If humans are made from clay and divine blood, then every person becomes a walking contradiction. You are mud that thinks. You are dust that complains. You are a fragile creature carrying a trace of something above you, and somehow expected to deliver offerings on time. The thought is beautiful. It is also inconvenient. Fringe interpretations take this mixture and carry it into stranger territory. They imagine divine blood as genetic material, clay as a laboratory medium, and the gods as technicians shaping life through trial and error. In that reading, humanity is not born from sacred poetry, but from controlled design. The Anunnaki become engineers, and creation becomes a project. Mainstream scholars do not accept that as a direct reading of the tablets. The texts do not speak in scientific terms, and forcing them to do so can flatten their ancient richness. Yet the fascination is understandable. The old myth already contains mixture, planning, physical material, divine intervention, and a purpose assigned before the creature lives. Those are powerful ingredients for modern imagination. They make the clay feel less like a symbol and more like a sealed container. What exactly was placed inside? You look down at your hands. They're ordinary hands, warm, lined, capable of work and tenderness. In the old stories, such hands are not accidental. They are tools made for lifting baskets, shaping bricks, grinding grain, digging channels, and raising offerings toward gods who expect remembrance. Humanity is created with function in mind. That can sound harsh to modern ears, because modern people like to believe they are made for self-expression, personal growth, and possibly good lighting. The ancient world is less flattering. It asks who feeds the temple. It asks who maintains the canals. It asks who carries the load when divine beings refuse to carry it any longer. Clay becomes an answer to a labour shortage. You kneel in the river mud of the imagination, and the scene grows slower. The clay is kneaded. Water shines on its surface. A divine command settles over it like breath before speech. Perhaps a drop of sacred blood darkens the mixture. Perhaps a goddess shapes small forms as if forming bricks, except these bricks will stand upright and dream. The boundary between making and birthing becomes blurred. That blur matters. In ancient Mesopotamian thought, creation is often not a single abstract command. It can involve craft, it can involve birth, it can involve speech, ritual, and physical formation. A thing becomes real because it is named, shaped, assigned, and inserted into order. Humanity is not merely alive. Humanity is placed. The scholarly debate remains open over how much these myths preserve older oral traditions from early Sumerian culture. Some specialists emphasize the later written forms that survive. Others point toward deep continuity in Mesopotamian religious ideas, passed through scribal schools and temple traditions. The tablets are often copies of copies, shaped by centuries of memory. That makes them precious, but also difficult. Clay preserves. Clay also breaks. You can sense that fragility in every line. A missing sign can change a mood. A broken corner can hide a name. A damaged tablet can turn certainty into silence. Perhaps this is why creation myths invite so much speculation. They arrive incomplete, like a face seen through smoke, and in the smoke, people find what they are searching for. Some find theology, some find literature, some find ancient psychology, some find evidence of forbidden history. The careful path is quieter. It allows the myth to be ancient before it becomes modern. It does not demand that every divine act must be a technological procedure. It does not deny, either, that these stories reveal something strange about how humans understood themselves. The human being is formed, mixed, burdened, and animated. That is enough mystery for one night. You hear a faint sound now, perhaps the first breath. It rises from the shaped clay like wind entering a reed pipe. The body is not yet a citizen, not yet a farmer, not yet a mourner at a grave. It is only beginning. Eyes open, skin dries. The creature looks out upon a world already organised by powers it did not choose. Imagine that first confusion. To awaken already obligated. To breathe and discover that breath itself has a job attached. The old myths do not dwell on human childhood in the way modern stories might. They are interested in function, hierarchy, and cosmic balance. A person is valuable because a person can take up the work. The divine realm can rest, or at least complain less. The temples can be supplied, the rituals can continue, the channels can be cleared, grain can rise from mud. This is where the ancient creation language becomes almost unsettlingly practical. Humanity is sacred, yes. Humanity is useful, certainly. Both things are true at once. Perhaps that is the most enduring power of the clay and blood motif. It refuses to make people either low or high. You are not merely dirt. You are not purely divine. You are the meeting place, the compromise, the living mixture. Your body belongs to the river bank. Your questions reach beyond the stars. Your labour feeds systems that existed before you understood them. The river keeps moving. The clay cools beneath your palms. Somewhere, a scribe presses wedges into a tablet, preserving a version of this mystery for hands not yet born. The signs will outlive him. They will cross deserts of time. They will reach museums, universities, and quiet rooms where listeners in the dark ask why ancient people imagined themselves this way. Not as accidents, not as kings, as made beings, as working beings, as clay carrying a hidden spark. And perhaps, when the old texts speak of breath entering matter, they are not only describing an origin. Perhaps they are describing the human condition itself. Every day, something heavy in you rises. Every day, something fragile carries more than it should. Every day, the mud remembers the hand that shaped it, even when the hand has vanished into silence. In your ears, the river sound changes into the scrape of baskets against damp earth. You are standing beside a canal that has not yet become a proud symbol of civilization. It is only a trench, long and stubborn, cut through stubborn soil beneath a heavy sky. The air smells of mud, sweat, reeds, and standing water. Mosquitoes hang over the banks like tiny priests of irritation, making certain that no divine project remains too dignified. The work is endless. The mud must be lifted. The banks must be strengthened. The channels must be cleared again when silt returns, because silt always returns. That is one of the small tyrannies of river life. A canal is never finished. It is only maintained, watched, repaired, and begged politely not to collapse at the worst possible moment. In the Mesopotamian imagination, this endless labour reaches even into the realm of the gods. Mainstream studies of the Atrahasis tradition, preserved in later Akkadian form, show a remarkable story. The lesser gods grow weary from labouring for the greater gods. They dig waterways, bear burdens, and finally protest against their exhausting condition. Scholars at the University of Chicago and other leading centres have treated this as one of the great ancient reflections on work, authority, and social order. It is not merely a tale of divine drama, it is a myth about exhaustion that makes it feel strangely close. You can imagine the divine workers in the heat. Their shoulders ache, their hands are raw, their tempers thin. The old story gives them something almost tenderly familiar. They are not abstract lights drifting through perfect heavens. They are tired labourers in a cosmic irrigation scheme, and frankly, one understands their complaint. A god may shine, a god may command, but after enough mud, even holiness needs a meeting. The myth presents this unrest as a crisis within divine society. The lower gods rebel or refuse the burden, depending on the version and interpretation. Their work has become intolerable. The order of the cosmos itself depends on labour, but the labourers no longer accept the arrangement. That is when creation becomes necessary, not as ornament, but as solution. Humanity enters the mythic design as replacement labour. There is no gentle way to say it. The ancient account does not begin with a romantic celebration of human uniqueness. It begins with a workforce problem in heaven. The gods need food, offerings, canals, fields, and ritual service. Someone must take up the task. So humans are made to carry the load that divine beings reject. It is almost funny. It is also very serious. The old Mesopotamian world understood labour as the base of everything. Grain did not magically rise. Temples did not supply themselves. Bricks did not walk into walls, though that would have saved everyone considerable trouble. Every city required organised bodies, counted goods, measured fields, and managed effort. The myth turns this earthly reality upward. Heaven has its own hierarchy. Heaven has its own workers. Heaven has its own problem with management. A council must decide what to do. The divine assembly gathers in the imagination like a court beneath storm-coloured light. The greater gods must preserve order without doing the backbreaking work themselves. The lesser gods demand relief. A plan emerges. A new creature will be fashioned. This being will work in place of the gods. This being will provide offerings and maintain the systems of life. That being is you, in the ancient mirror. Not you personally, of course, though the mud does point rather rudely in your direction. You as humanity, you as the upright creature between river and sky, you as the one who wakes beneath obligation, wondering why existence comes with so many chores. Scholars continue to debate how this labour myth reflects the realities of early Mesopotamian society. Some emphasise temple economies and agricultural demands. Some focus on class hierarchy and the experience of corvée labour, where communities owed work to authorities. Others read the story more broadly, as a theological explanation for why humans serve gods through ritual. Prestigious university research in ancient Near Eastern studies does not reduce the myth to one meaning. It lets several meanings breathe together. That's wise. Ancient stories rarely have only one door. A quirky fringe tidbit wanders in here, wearing sandals and looking too pleased with itself. Some modern theorists have claimed that the divine labour crisis describes an extraterrestrial mining or engineering operation, with humanity created as a servant species. In that version, the Anunnaki are not weary gods but colonising technicians. It is a popular reading in certain circles, though it stands far outside mainstream scholarship. Still, it borrows its emotional power from a genuine ancient theme. Humans are made because higher beings need work done. The fringe version exaggerates the machinery. The tablet preserves the burden. You move along the canal edge, and the day darkens slightly. The trench seems to stretch without end. Workers bend and rise, each motion part of a rhythm older than songs. Clay baskets fill, clay baskets empty, feet slide, backs strain. The river does not care who digs, it only follows gravity, flood, and season. This is the world the myth understands. It is not a paradise where creation means leisure. It is a maintenance world. Every gift requires tending. The field requires water. The water requires channels. The channels require clearing. The temple requires offerings. The offerings require grain. The grain requires bodies in the sun. The system is sacred, but it is not gentle. You sense why gods and humans are bound together here. The gods grant order, fertility, kingship, and divine favour. Humans provide food, worship, labour, and remembrance. It is a relationship of dependence, but not equality. The ancient city is built on that imbalance. Temples rise high, while workers move below them. Smoke ascends from lofrings, while mud clings to ankles. A council decree from later Mesopotamian royal records can prove how deeply labour was organised in these societies through assignments, rations, and obligations. Administrative tablets confirm the daily reality behind the mythic image. People were counted, work was recorded, grain was distributed, the sacred and economic worlds were tightly woven together. You can almost hear the scribe's reed stylus tapping softly against wet clay. Name, measure, ration, task. No wonder creation becomes a matter of assignment. In this ancient vision, to exist is to occupy a place in the order. Gods rule, kings mediate, priests serve temples, workers maintain land, animals pull, carry, feed, and symbolize. Humans stand in the middle, both honoured and burdened, made from sacred mixture yet tied to soil. That tension gives the myth its lasting unease. You're told humanity is important, but not free in the modern sense. You're told humanity is made with divine involvement, but not simply for delight. You're told the world has purpose, but that purpose includes work so repetitive it could make even a god revolt. The canal grows quiet. The workers fade into silhouettes. The sun lowers, red through dust. A smell of cooked grain travels from some unseen settlement, warm and comforting. The day's labour has not ended the need for labour. It has only postponed disaster until morning, which is often what civilization means when it is being honest. A soft thought settles over the water. Perhaps the ancient myth is not asking you to admire the gods. Perhaps it is asking you to notice how every system survives by transferring burden. The divine transfers work to the human. The king transfers orders to the labourer. The city transfers pressure to the field. The field transfers need to the canal. The canal transfers mud back into human hands. Everything depends on someone carrying something. This is why the creation of humanity in these texts feels so different from a simple origin tale. It is not only about where people come from, it is about what people are for, at least as the ancient world imagined them. The answer is not flattering, but it is not meaningless either. To work is to participate in cosmic order. To serve is to keep the fragile structure from falling apart. You listen to the night insects begin. Their small sounds gather above the water. The gods of the story retreat into their high places, relieved perhaps, or merely satisfied. The new creature stands below them, clay-footed and breathing, handed the tools of maintenance. It looks at the canal. It looks at the sky. It begins to understand that life will be measured in tasks, and still, within that burden, something unexpected appears. The creature works, but also remembers. The creature serves, but also questions. The creature carries baskets, but also raises eyes toward the stars. Perhaps that is where the divine plan becomes less tidy than intended. A worker made from clay can still dream beyond the mud. A servant created to feed the gods can still wonder who made the gods tired. A being shaped for labour can still turn labour into song, ritual, story, and eventually writing. The canal water glimmers. The last basket is lifted. Somewhere, in the deep quiet of the old myth, the gods have solved their problem. Humanity has only begun to discover its own. Your hand rests near the edge of a broken tablet, and the missing lines feel louder than the surviving ones. There is a peculiar kind of silence in damaged clay. It is not empty. It is suggestive. A corner snaps away, and suddenly a god's command disappears. A crack passes through a name, and the name becomes a shadow. A whole section falls into loss, and the mind, being the restless little creature it is, begins filling the gap with possibilities. This is where the idea of failed forms begins to gather. Not as a neat Sumerian catalogue, not as a list with tidy headings and obedient creatures. The ancient texts do not offer that. They do not calmly announce that the Anunnaki tried every species, rejected most of them, then finally settled on humanity as the acceptable model. That claim belongs to modern fringe storytelling more than to preserved Sumerian literature. Yet something more subtle exists. The Mesopotamian imagination contains strange beings, mixed forms, malformed births, omen creatures, divine experiments in order, and myths where creation is not instant perfection. In later traditions connected to Mesopotamian thought, unusual births and impossible animals could be read as signs from the gods. Scholars at Yale and the University of Chicago have studied omen texts that treat physical oddities as messages, not mere accidents. That is a mainstream fact, and it matters. The ancient world watched bodies carefully. A lamb born with unusual features was not only a lamb. A child with a rare deformity was not only a medical event. A creature out of normal pattern could become a sentence written by heaven. The body itself could be a tablet, and nature could be read like script. That thought is unsettling. It makes every shape meaningful. You move through a dim storeroom of imagined antiquity, where shelves hold tablets concerned with omens, births, stars, storms, and kings. Oil lamps flicker against mud-brick walls. Wax smoke curls softly upward. The air smells of clay dust, linen, and old reed mats. Somewhere, a scribe clears his throat, copying a line he does not fully understand but has been told not to change. That is how mysteries survive. They are repeated by people who may not know why they matter. The fringe imagination enters through this door. It looks at strange creatures on seals, hybrid figures in art, birth omen texts, and creation myths involving clay and divine substance. Then it says, softly but confidently, perhaps these were not symbols at all. Perhaps these were records of attempted beings. Perhaps the gods shaped life through errors, prototypes, and failed designs. Perhaps humanity was not the first breathing form made for service. Mainstream scholarship is careful here. It usually reads hybrids as religious, symbolic, protective, or mythic figures. It reads omen texts as systems of divination. It reads creation myths as theological literature shaped by social realities. Researchers at Oxford would likely warn against turning ancient metaphor into modern science fiction. That warning is reasonable. Clay tablets are not laboratory notebooks. Still, the warning does not erase the atmosphere. The old materials are crowded with forms that trouble boundaries. There are humans with animal traits, animals with divine power, beings from the deep wearing fish-like cloaks, guardians with wings, monsters with composite bodies, divine servants who seem neither fully god nor fully human. Even when these are symbolic, symbols do not appear from nowhere. They grow from fears, questions, and desires. The ancient mind wondered about forms. What makes a body suitable? What makes a creature complete? What makes a being worthy of a place in the order? You pause beside a tablet that speaks, in broken lines, of creation and adjustment. The exact words do not need to be forced beyond their setting. The feeling is enough. In mythic worlds, creation can involve deliberation. Gods decide, shape, test, assign, and revise the structure of life. The human being enters as one result within a larger divine economy. A quirky tidbit from later Mesopotamian culture deepens the mood. Some omen collections treated unusual animal births as warnings about political events, military defeat, or the fate of a king. Imagine that. A calf born oddly in a village shed, and suddenly the palace becomes nervous. One poor calf, minding its difficult business, becomes a message about empire. History can be magnificently unfair, yet the logic is revealing. Nature was not random to these readers of signs. Strange forms mattered because they hinted at hidden arrangements. If the gods controlled order, then disorder might reveal divine intention. A body outside the norm was not discarded as meaningless. It was examined, interpreted, feared, and preserved in writing. This helps explain why modern listeners feel tempted by the idea of failed creations. The ancient world already connected unusual bodies with divine communication. It already imagined humanity as deliberately made. It already filled its art with beings between categories. The fringe theory simply gathers those threads and ties them into a single dramatic knot. A scholar may object to the knot. A storyteller notices the threads. You enter a quieter chamber now, where carved seals lie in rows. Their designs are so small that the eye must bend into them. A hero grips a beast by the throat. A winged figure stands behind a seated god. A horned creature turns its head with impossible calm. A serpent rises beside a tree or staff. These images were rolled across wet clay to mark ownership, authority, identity, and sacred relation. They are tiny worlds. Each one says that reality has layers. In such a world, a created species is not merely a biological category. It is a role in a sacred drama. Cattle pull and feed. Sheep clothe and nourish. Dogs guard. Birds announce, vanish, and return. Serpents shed skin. Fish move between visible and hidden waters. Humans work, speak, remember, and offer. Divine beings command and receive. Hybrid figures stand at the seams, warning that the seams are not as firm as people wish. Perhaps the failed forms are not failed animals at all. Perhaps they are failed explanations. The mind tries one shape, then another. It asks whether humans are animals with speech, servants with divine blood, clay statues animated by breath, or sparks trapped in mud. Every answer fits badly somewhere. So myth creates figures at the edges. It gives wings to what should walk. It gives scales to what should speak. It gives horns to holiness. It allows monsters to carry truths too awkward for ordinary bodies. The scholarly debate remains alive in a quieter form. Experts ask how much of Mesopotamian hybrid imagery comes from ritual protection, royal ideology, inherited mythology, or shared symbols across the ancient Near East. Some see local traditions, some see borrowing across regions, some see changes over time as Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian cultures reshape older motifs. No single answer swallows the whole field. That is comforting, in an academic sort of way. Even specialists must leave room for darkness. You feel that darkness now, not as fear, but as depth. The storeroom seems to stretch farther than it should. Shelves recede into shadow. A clay tablet bears a list of signs. Another carries a myth. Another records grain. Another preserves an omen about a birth no one alive can see. Together they suggest a civilization trying to read the world as if every creature might be a sentence. And in that reading, humanity is only one line. Not the first line, not necessarily the strangest, maybe not even the most obedient. You imagine unfinished bodies in the mythic dark, not as literal corpses or horrors, but as possibilities. A creature too strong to serve, a creature too silent to worship, a creature too wild to count grain, a creature too close to the gods to remain below them, a creature too animal to remember names, a creature too divine to accept a basket. These are not recorded species. They are questions wearing bodies. Their distinction matters. The tablets do not hand you a forbidden bestiary of Anunnaki experiments. They offer something more ancient and more elusive. They show a world where creation, form, labour, omen, and divine intention are woven together. They show that the boundary between creature and message was never entirely secure. The lamp flame lowers. The clay shells fade into brown shadow. Somewhere outside, an animal calls once, then falls silent. You cannot tell what kind of animal it is, and the uncertainty feels appropriate. The old texts do not want to become a modern chart. They prefer to remain a twilight field of signs. Perhaps failed forms are hidden there. Perhaps only human fear is hidden there. Perhaps the oldest people, looking at the strange variety of life, understood something that modern certainty sometimes forgets. Creation is not simple. A body is never just a body. A species is never only a species. Every living form carries a question about why it was shaped this way, and what power believed it belonged in the world. The scent changes into sun-warmed brick animal hide, and crushed barley near a temple wall. You stand in the outer court of a Sumerian city, where shadows fall sharply beneath the noon light. The temple rises above the settlement like a mountain built by human hands, tier upon tier of mud brick hardened beneath the southern sun. Around it, life gathers in noisy, ordinary patterns. Goats nose at baskets. Dogs sleep in narrow shade. Oxen pull against wooden yokes. Birds pick through spilled grain with the confidence of tiny thieves. The divine world is not far away here. It presses close through every creature. Animals in ancient Mesopotamia were never merely background decoration. They fed households, marked wealth, pulled ploughs, supplied wool, carried goods, and appeared constantly in art and ritual. Records from excavated temple archives confirm that sheep, cattle, goats, donkeys, and birds were counted with extraordinary care. Scholars at the University of Pennsylvania and the Oriental Institute have shown how deeply animal management shaped early city life. The economy of holiness had hooves. That is a very ancient truth. A temple could be sacred and still smell like livestock. You walk past a pen where sheep crowd together in soft, dusty confusion. Their wool catches bits of straw. Their eyes shine with that strange sideways calm common to animals who know more than they intend to say. A boy pours feed into a trough. A temple worker marks numbers in clay. A priest passes nearby, careful not to step in anything undignified. Even religion has practical hazards. The Sumerians lived among animals, depended on them, feared them, and transformed them into symbols. A bull could represent strength, fertility, storm power, and royal might. A lion could embody danger and kingship. A serpent could suggest hidden wisdom, renewal, threat, or the chthonic depths beneath the visible world. Birds crossed the sky like messengers. Fish belonged to waters that seemed older than land. Each creature carried more than its body. Each body was a sign. This is where the question of created species becomes richer. The ancient texts may not list every animal as an Anunnaki experiment, but Sumerian culture certainly placed animals within a sacred structure of meaning. The gods had emblems. Cities had patron deities. Temple offerings included animal products. Seals and plaques showed creatures in dramatic relation to divine and heroic figures. Life was classified not by modern taxonomy, but by use, power, danger, and symbolic force. You pause beside a carved stone bowl. On it, a lion grips prey in stylized strength. The muscles are not realistic in the modern sense, yet they feel true. The artist has not copied a lion. The artist has captured what a lion does to the human imagination. It enters the mind as a force. Its body becomes an argument that the world is not tame. Nearby, a bull lowers its head in another carved scene. Horns curve like crescent moons. The animal feels patient and terrifying at once. To an agricultural people, cattle meant strength harnessed to human need, yet the same strength could break loose. That double meaning mattered. Civilization required animal power, but always feared its refusal. A quirky fringe tidbit slips in through the temple gate. Some modern interpreters claim that these animals were symbolic memories of engineered lineages, each shaped by divine beings for a purpose. Bulls for labour, sheep for wool, dogs for guarding. Serpents for something more mysterious naturally, because no fringe theory has ever looked at a serpent and said, "No thank you, that seems ordinary." Mainstream scholarship reads the matter differently. Researchers from Oxford and Yale tend to view animal imagery as religious symbolism, economic reflection, and artistic convention. Their debate often concerns how specific animal motifs travelled across regions, changed between periods, or attached themselves to particular gods. Was the lion mainly royal, divine, protective, or all at once? Did the serpent signify underworld danger, healing, renewal, or sacred mystery? The answer often depends on context, and ancient context is annoyingly fond of hiding. That uncertainty is not failure. It is the texture of the past. You move toward the temple entrance, and the city seems to breathe around you. The walls radiate heat. A worker carries a basket of dates. A woman leads a goat by a cord. A scribe frowns at a tally. In the shade, children watch insects climb a cracked brick. Giving them the grave attention children give to tiny kingdoms. Above the doorway, animal figures appear in relief and memory. They are guardians, emblems, warnings, and invitations to think beyond ordinary sight. You begin to sense that animals were not simply below humans in the ancient order. They were woven through it. They belonged to the gods, to omens, to offerings, to labour, to food, to fear, and to dreams. A dog might guard a threshold. A bull might pull a plough. A sheep might feed a temple. A serpent might appear in a healing charm or an omen, depending on the setting and the reader. Each creature lived inside practical reality and sacred interpretation at once. That double life made animals powerful in the ancient imagination. The modern phrase, every species feels too rigid for this world, Sumerian thought did not arrange life as a chart of biological divisions. It arranged beings by relationship. Who serves? Who threatens? Who blesses? Who belongs to which god? Who appears at night? Who dwells in marsh, desert, river, field, or sky? Who crosses boundaries? Species in this old landscape are not just forms. They are positions in a cosmic household. You stand near the temple kitchen, where smoke rises from cooking fires. The smell of roasting meat mingles with bread, beer mash, and incense. Offerings are prepared, not as symbolic gestures only, but as real food in a real economy. The gods receive portions. Priests and workers handle distributions. Animals become sacrifice, sustenance, wealth, and sacred communication. This is not sentimental, it is intimate. To live among animals in ancient Sumer was to depend on lives that were not human. That dependence shaped myth. It shaped art. It shaped metaphors of kingship and divinity. If humans were made to serve the gods, animals often served humans and temples. Yet they also represented powers humans could not master completely. The hierarchy was never simple. A sheep could be counted, but a lion could haunt a royal imagination. A bull could be harnessed, but its horns still belonged to moonlight and storm. The scholarly debate remains open over how certain animal symbols move from everyday observation into formal divine iconography. Some specialists emphasize local ecology, noting that marshes, fields, and herding life shape the symbolic world. Others point to long-distance exchange, where motifs travelled from Iran, Anatolia, the Gulf, and beyond. Still others focus on ritual use, where repeated ceremonies gave animals sacred meaning beyond their natural traits. You feel these explanations layering together like dust. None cancels the others. The temple court becomes quieter as evening approaches. Animals settle into softer sounds. Hooves shift. Birds return to roof edges. A donkey releases a weary breath that sounds almost philosophical, though perhaps that is generous. The sky turns bronze over the flat city, and the ziggurat catches the last light. In that glow, the animal world seems older than the human one. Not scientifically alone, though that is true, emotionally older, mythically older. Creatures moved, hunted, grazed, nested, and swam long before the first city counted them. Sumerian culture did not forget that power. It placed animals near gods because animals carried the memory of a world not made for human comfort. Perhaps this is why hybrid figures matter so much. They are not random decorations. They are the meeting point of species and meaning. A human body with animal traits can suggest wisdom, danger, guardianship, chaos, divine nearness, or sacred service. Such images do not prove that ancient beings engineered life forms, but they do prove that ancient people thought deeply about bodies, boundaries, and the mysterious authority of form. You step back from the temple wall, The bull, lion, serpent, fish, bird, sheep, and a dog do not line up like failed attempts. They gather like witnesses. Each creature says something about power. Each one reveals a different way to live inside creation. Some serve through strength, some through wool or milk, some through fear, some through flight, some through silent movement beneath water, some through the mere fact that humans cannot fully understand them. And perhaps that is the hidden system behind the animals of Sumer. Not a laboratory of species, but a sacred grammar of bodies. The gods speak through forms because forms are what humans can see. Horns, claws, wings, scales, eyes, hides, and hooves become letters in a language older than writing. The temple gathers those letters and arranges them around human life, reminding every visitor that mankind is surrounded by other kinds of being. You listen as the court fades into dusk. A goat coughs softly. A bird vanishes into the high light. The stone lion keeps its mouth open forever. In the slow calm of the ancient city, you begin to understand why later imagination saw experiments in these creatures. Each one feels designed for a role. Each one fits some hidden need. Yet the older and quieter reading may be stranger still. The animals are not failed humans. They are complete messages. They carry their own sacred purposes through the dust, beside the temples, under the gaze of gods who knew that creation needed more than one shape. A damp wind rises from the marshes carrying the smell of fish, reeds, and distant rain. You stand at the edge of deep water, where the river loses its certainty and becomes a maze of channels. The land is low here, soft beneath the feet, and the sky hangs wide over the shining flats. Boats move in the distance like dark insects on bronze water. A heron lifts slowly from the reeds, offended by nothing in particular, which is the usual privilege of herons. The old world feels half made of water. In Mesopotamian tradition, wisdom often comes from depths that cannot be easily seen. Fresh water matters profoundly in this landscape. It irrigates the fields, fills the canals, feeds the marshes, and threatens to overwhelm everything when rivers rise beyond human control. The deep is not only physical, it is mythic. Beneath the ordered city lies an older world of hidden knowledge. This is where the Apkallu appear. They are remembered in later Mesopotamian tradition as ancient sages, culture bringers, and figures connected with wisdom before the Great Flood. Some are described in texts and art with fish-like features or garments, standing between human and aquatic form. Scholars at major institutions, including the British Museum and universities such as Oxford, have studied these figures as part of Mesopotamian learned tradition. They belong to the long memory of kingship, knowledge, ritual protection. An antediluvian time, the word antediluvian means before the flood. It already feels like a door opening. You picture one of these sages emerging from the water at dusk, not violently, not with a crash fit for a very expensive film, quietly, almost politely. The surface wrinkles, reeds tremble. A figure steps from the dark shallows, clothed in the shape of a fish, yet moving with human intention. Water streams from the scaled covering. The eyes face forward. The hands are ready not to hunt, but to teach. That is the old image. Half fish, half wise presence. Not quite animal, not quite human, not simply divine. A fringe reader sees such a figure and immediately grows excited. Perhaps, they say, this is a memory of amphibious beings, engineered species, or visitors from another world who came from the sea. Perhaps the Anunnaki fashioned aquatic servants before land-dwelling humans. Perhaps wisdom was first tested in bodies that belong to water. It is a dramatic idea, and one must admit, fish-cloaked sages do not exactly discourage the imagination. Mainstream scholarship walks more carefully. The Apkallu are usually understood as mythic sages, ritual figures, or symbolic ancestors of learned knowledge. They represent civilization's arts, temple wisdom, and protective power. In some traditions, They advise early kings and bring knowledge that orders society. Scholars debate whether the fish garments link them to the freshwater deep, priestly costume, ritual purity, or older cultic symbols. The question remains open, but not empty. You watch the marsh darken. The waters glitter under a sky that seems almost too large. The air is alive with insect hum, bird calls, and the soft slap of waves against reed stems. Somewhere, a fisherman adjusts a net. Somewhere else, a child learns that mud can steal sandals with impressive determination. Civilization depends on this wet confusion, though it will later pretend to be made only of temples and kings. The Apkallu belong to the border. They stand where water meets land, where animal shape meets human wisdom, where memory meets myth. Their strange bodies make sense in a culture that treated form as meaning. Fish are creatures of the hidden depths. Humans are speakers, makers, builders, and record keepers. Combine them, and you receive a being who brings concealed knowledge into the visible world. That is not biology. It is symbolism with gills. Yet symbolism can be powerful enough to survive for millennia. The fish-cloaked sage appears on reliefs and in ritual context long after the earlier Sumerian cities. Assyrian palace art, made much later, preserves figures in fish garments performing protective gestures. Records confirm that ancient Mesopotamian ritual specialists used images and figurines of sages for apotropaic purposes, meaning protective magic against harmful forces. The word sounds grand, but the idea is simple. Keep the bad things out. People have always wanted that. The ancient home, like the modern one, needed protection from misfortune, illness, bad dreams, angry powers, and whatever was making that noise outside at night. The Apkallu could stand as guardians of thresholds, bearers of ancient wisdom, and reminders that ordered life depends on knowledge older than the present city. You move closer to the water, the mud cools around your feet, the reeds brush your arms, a fish breaks the surface and vanishes, leaving only widening rings. It is easy to understand why water became a storehouse of secrets. You can see its surface, but not its full depth. You can drink from it, but not command it completely. You can build canals, but a flood can undo generations of confidence in one season. Wisdom from water is fitting. Water teaches humility. In the hidden timeline imagined by later interpreters, the Apkallu become evidence that humanity was not alone at the beginning of civilization. They appear as instructors arriving from somewhere outside ordinary human development. They teach agriculture, writing, ritual and law, measurement, building, or sacred arts. The ancient traditions do connect them with culture and knowledge, but the leap to literal non-human species remains speculative. The debate turns on how myth remembers origins. Some scholars view the Apkallu as personifications of priestly learning projected into primordial time. Others see them as mythic ancestors of scribal culture, giving sacred pedigree to knowledge systems. Still others compare them with culture heroes across the ancient world, figures who bring essential skills from gods to humans. None of these readings requires a secret species, yet all of them admit that Mesopotamian tradition imagined civilization as a gift from powers beyond ordinary people. That gift is never casual. Knowledge changes the creature who receives it. A human taught to write can remember beyond death. A human taught to measure fields can command land from season to season. A human taught ritual can speak to gods in approved ways, which is always safer than improvising. A human taught kingship can organize thousands of bodies into a single will. Wisdom is not decoration. It is power. The Apkallu carry that power from the deep. You imagine them moving through early cities, or through stories about early cities. Their fish cloaks glisten in lamplight. Their voices are low. They know the correct offerings, the hidden names, the measures of temples, the proper ways to protect a doorway. They are not quite rulers. They are not ordinary servants. They are intermediaries, and intermediaries are often the most unsettling figures in any sacred system. They know too much. A quirky detail from Mesopotamian learned tradition adds to the atmosphere. Some later lists connect specific sages with specific early kings, as if wisdom itself were assigned to royal courts. The idea is wonderfully bureaucratic. Even supernatural knowledge apparently needed an appointment schedule. A king receives a sage, civilization receives instruction, and someone probably still has to update the tablet. You smile faintly, then the water darkens again. The Apkallu also complicate the idea of species. Their form suggests a creature that crosses categories, but their function suggests something more important than anatomy. They are not created merely to exist. They are created in memory to transmit order. Their body is a message about where wisdom comes from, and perhaps about why humans cannot claim to invent civilization alone. The old stories prefer humility. They say knowledge descended. They say wisdom arrived. They say human order was taught by beings linked to waters older than kings. This does not prove that the Anunnaki tried to create fish people before humans. It does reveal that Mesopotamian imagination made room for beings who were neither simple animals nor ordinary humans. It placed such beings at the beginning of civilization, where the first patterns of rule, craft, and sacred knowledge took shape. That placement matters. The marsh grows hushed. A boat pole knocks softly against wood. Night insects start their long, thin music. The horizon becomes indistinct, as if land and water have agreed to stop arguing until dawn. You feel how easily a listener in a later age could transform these sages into ancient biological experiments. Their forms are strange enough. Their timing is early enough. Their wisdom is suspiciously useful enough. But the older reading remains quieter and deeper. The Apkallu may be less like failed species and more like preserved questions. Who first taught humans how to live as more than scattered bodies? Who brought order to the reed huts, the fields, the shrines, and the king's house? Was civilization invented by need, gifted by gods, or remembered as something arriving from beyond the visible shore? The water gives no answer. It only reflects a few stars. And in that reflection, the fish-cloaked sages remain what they have always been, figures at the edge of certainty. They rise from deep waters carrying wisdom, not because history can prove their footsteps, but because the ancient world needed a shape for knowledge too old, too useful, and too mysterious to belong to humans alone. Cold stone touches your palm as you lift a tiny cylinder seal into the light. It is smaller than the handle of a knife, yet it carries an entire world around its curved surface. The carving is delicate, almost impossibly patient. A seated god raises one hand. A worshipper approaches with stiff reverence. A creature with horns bends its neck. Another figure seems to stand between species, wearing a body that refuses to settle into one easy category. When the seal rolls across wet clay, the hidden scene appears. That alone feels like a kind of magic. Cylinder seals were among the most distinctive objects of ancient Mesopotamia. Scholars at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, Yale, and the British Museum have studied thousands of them as tools of identity, administration, art, and religious expression. They marked ownership, sealed containers, authorized transactions, and carried images of the sacred world into daily life. A seal was practical, but it was never only practical. It was a signature with a dream inside. You turn the imagined seal slowly. The room is dim, perhaps a scribal office near a temple storehouse. Clay tablets rest on shelves. Reed baskets sit against the wall. A lamp flame shakes whenever someone opens the door. Wax smoke and sesame oil mix with the smell of damp clay. A scribe would press this little object into a tablet or jar ceiling, and suddenly a private mark became a miniature procession of gods, beasts, and impossible guardians. That is where the monsters begin to move. Not monsters in the loud modern sense, not roaring horrors made for sudden fear. These are older, quieter beings. Composite creatures, winged animals, lions with human associations, bulls with divine force, serpents near sacred scenes, scorpion men in later traditions, eagle-headed figures, fish-cloaked sages, bodies assembled from power, warning, and memory. They are unsettling because they are orderly. Nothing about them feels random. A mainstream historical fact steadies the vision. Mesopotamian art frequently used composite beings to express divine protection, cosmic danger, royal strength, or liminal power. Archaeologists and art historians have shown that such images appear on seals, plaques, reliefs, and ritual objects across many centuries. Their meanings shift with context, period, and place. A guardian in one setting may not mean exactly what a similar figure means elsewhere. Ancient symbols are slippery creatures. They rarely sit still for the lecture. A fringe interpretation leans close to the seal and whispers another story. Perhaps these carvings are not symbols at all. Perhaps they are records of hybrid species created by divine beings before humans. Perhaps the Anunnaki tested bodies by combining wings, claws, horns, scales, and human intelligence. Perhaps cylinder seals preserve a lost biological archive, reduced by later priests into sacred art. It is a captivating thought. It is also not what careful scholars can prove, yet the power of the idea comes from the objects themselves. These small seals do show beings outside ordinary nature. They do show bodies that cross boundaries. They do show a world where the human, animal, and divine are arranged in layered relationship. Even if they are symbolic, they still reveal an ancient fascination with mixed form. You imagine a seal cutter at work. He sits close to the lamp, eyes narrowed, fingers steady. The stone is hard, perhaps hematite, lapis, serpentine, or another material carried through trade routes. He carves with tools small enough to make your own fingers ache just thinking about them. Line by line, he releases a creature from stone, horns, wings, muscles, beard, claw, eye, gesture. He does not explain himself. Rude again, but common in antiquity. The creature he carves may be a guardian, a divine attendant, a sign of power, or an image inherited from older designs. To him, perhaps, it is not strange at all. It belongs to the visual language of his world. To you, raised in a later age of categories and museum labels, it feels like a question pressed into stone. What is a body allowed to be? The scholarly debate here is wonderfully alive. Some experts ask whether composite creatures originated in ritual protection, royal ideology, mythic storytelling, or the circulation of artistic motifs between Mesopotamia, Iran, Syria, Anatolia, and Egypt. Others examine whether certain figures are meant to represent named beings from myths, or broader symbols of strength and divine authority. The evidence is abundant, yet never simple. One seal can carry more than one meaning. That is the charm and the trap. You roll the seal again. The impression appears in wet clay. A winged figure now stands clear where the curved stone had hidden it. This transformation matters. The image is not visible all at once on the cylinder. It must be revealed through pressure and movement. Ancient art here becomes an act of emergence. The creature appears only when the seal meets clay, like a memory awakened by touch. That is almost too perfect. The miniature world depends on contact. The seal itself also belongs to administration. It authenticates goods, closures, records, and authority. So the monster, the god, and the hybrid form do not live apart from economic life. They sit on jars, doors, tablets, and bales. They guard transactions. They witness agreements. They bring the sacred imagination into the storage room, which is exactly where any sensible ancient person would want protection. Grain theft is not glamorous, but it ruins evenings. The monster becomes a clerk of the unseen. You stand inside that thought for a while. A creature with wings may not be meant to fly through natural air. It may fly through symbolic space, carrying authority between the human and divine worlds. A horned being may not be a zoological puzzle. Horns in Mesopotamian art often mark divinity or sacred power. A serpent may not be a failed design. It may be a sign of danger, renewal, healing, or hidden wisdom, depending on context. A lion may not represent a creature tried and rejected before humans. It may represent power that no city fully tames. Still, the effect remains uncanny. The seal gathers forms as if creation itself were being rearranged. You can see why later imaginations turn these images into evidence. The human eye seeks continuity. It sees a fish sage, a winged guardian, a lion dragon, a scorpion man, a serpent god, and begins to suspect a system. Were these categories of beings? Were they ranks in a forgotten order? Were they creatures assigned to different tasks before humanity took the central burden? The tablets do not answer cleanly. The seals answer even less. They show, they do not confess. A quirky detail brightens the gloom. Many cylinder seals were used so often that their images wore down from daily handling. Imagine a terrifying divine creature, slowly softened by paperwork. The monster that once guarded cosmic order becomes blurry because someone kept sealing deliveries of barley. There is something beautifully human in that. Even supernatural guardians suffer from office wear. The clay impression before you begins to dry. Its surface dulls. The sharp lines grow permanent. A small act of administration becomes an artifact, and an artifact becomes a problem for scholars thousands of years later. Was this seal chosen for beauty, piety, status, protection, family identity, professional role, or simple availability? Perhaps the owner liked the creature. Perhaps the creature was fashionable. Ancient people, despite their solemn museum lighting, also had taste. The debate refuses to close. That refusal is useful for this story, because the central mystery is not whether every monster was literal. The deeper question is why early civilization filled its administrative, sacred, and royal objects with beings that crossed boundaries. Why place hybrid bodies so close to ownership, authority, and memory? Why let strange creatures guard the passage between intention and record? Perhaps because the ancients understood that order needs guardians at its edges. A city wall is only meaningful because there is wildness outside it. A human body is only meaningful because animal bodies surround it. Divine authority is only visible because ordinary life needs signs of what it cannot see. The hybrid creature stands where categories meet, reminding people that the world is not as separate as it appears. You set the seal down. The room grows still. The tiny carved monster remains curled around the stone, sleeping until pressure wakes it again. It is not quite proof of a forgotten species. It is not merely decoration either. It is a compressed vision of reality, one that says human life is watched by powers with claws, wings, horns, scales, and faces that disturb easy thought. In the hush, you understand why these seals matter. They do not give a list of beings the Anunnaki tried to make. They give something stranger and more ancient. They give a world where creation is imagined as layered, guarded, and unstable at the borders. They let you hold a civilization's anxiety between two fingers. The lamp flickers once. The creature waits in stone, and somewhere, in the darkness behind the carved line, the old question remains alive. Were these images warnings, symbols, sacred metaphors, or the last shadows of stories that even the scribes no longer fully understood? The air softens into the scent of wet garden, date palms, and river mist. You find yourself near a sacred enclosure at the edge of cultivated land, where channels bring water through dark soil. The garden is not wild, but it is not fully tame either. Its order is delicate. Palms rise in rows, herbs grow close to the ground, figs darken in leaves, birds fuss in branches as if they personally invented dawn and expect some recognition. Beyond the garden, the world stretches outward into marsh, plain, and uncertain horizon. The Sumerian landscape always lived between abundance and danger. The rivers brought fertility, but they also brought flood and salt. Fields could feed cities, yet only if water was guided with skill. A garden, then, was not just pleasant scenery. It was a visible victory over disorder, a small paradise maintained by labour, ritual, and careful channels. That is one reason ancient sacred gardens matter. They hold the dream of controlled life. Mainstream historians and archaeologists have long recognised that Mesopotamian cities depended on irrigation agriculture. Research connected with universities such as Chicago, Pennsylvania, and Oxford confirms the importance of canals, grain fields, orchards, and temple lands in early urban growth. The garden was practical, economic, and symbolic at once. It fed bodies, honoured gods, and displayed order in a land where nature could be generous one season and deeply rude the next. You walk slowly along a watercourse. The mud is cool at the edge. A frog moves unseen among reeds. A gardener cuts away dead growth with a small blade. The sound is gentle, almost ceremonial. Water slides between raised beds, reflecting pale sky. Every channel must be kept clear. Every route depends on timing. Nothing here survives by beauty alone. The garden has rules. In Mesopotamian myth, sacred places often appear as ordered spaces where gods, kings, plants, animals, and human labour meet. These are not always gardens in the later romantic sense, with quiet benches and tasteful arrangements. They are living systems. They are productive, fragrant, and controlled. They are places where fertility is made visible. A fringe tidbit grows naturally from this soil. Some modern interpreters connect Mesopotamian garden traditions with the idea of a hidden biological preserve, where the Anunnaki observed created beings before humanity was placed into wider labour. In that version, the sacred garden becomes less a temple orchard and more an ancient enclosure for experiments. It is imaginative, certainly. One can almost hear the academic cough from across the room. Yet the fantasy borrows from a real ancient pattern. Gardens are places of selection. Some plants are encouraged, others are cut away. Water is granted here, denied there. The gardener does not create life from nothing, but he arranges conditions in which certain life may flourish. That image easily becomes a metaphor for divine design. If gods shape the world, they might do so like gardeners, cultivating some beings, pruning others, and watching the results beneath an unblinking sky. You move deeper between the palms. Light falls in narrow bars through fronds. The ground smells of damp earth and crushed green stems. Bees hum among flowers. Somewhere, a date bunch hangs heavy and golden brown. The scene is beautiful, but the beauty is not soft. It is supervised. It depends on boundaries, walls, canals, tools, hands, and obedience to seasonal rhythms. That is why gardens in ancient imagination can feel slightly unsettling. They are alive under management. The hidden timeline begins to stir here. Long before kings boasted of conquered lands, stories placed divine or semi-divine figures near ordered landscapes. Long before history counted dynasties in a modern way, Mesopotamian tradition imagined early rulers and sages connected to a world before the Great Flood. Those figures stand at the misty edge of memory, where cities exist but feel closer to myth than to archaeology. The Sumerian king list famously names rulers before the flood and gives them reigns of impossible length. Scholars do not treat those numbers as ordinary political chronology. They study them as royal ideology, sacred time, and literary memory. Still, the list confirms that Mesopotamian tradition imagined a deep age of civilization before catastrophe. That fact gives the ancient garden a longer shadow. A world before the flood, a city before the reset, a cultivated place before memory breaks. The scholarly debate asks how to understand these antediluvian traditions. Some researchers see them as mythic expressions of kingship descending from divine authority. Others explore whether flood traditions preserve cultural memories of real river disasters that were reshaped through storytelling. Still others focus on how scribes use the past to give legitimacy to later cities and kings. The debate remains open, not because evidence is absent, but because the evidence speaks in mythic grammar. You pause beside a pool. The water is still enough to reflect your face, but the reflection trembles whenever an insect touches the surface. That seems appropriate. Ancient memory behaves the same way. The more closely you look, the more it ripples. Near the pool, animals move through the ordered space, birds gather in trees, fish flash in channels. A goat reaches for leaves it has no permission to eat, which has never stopped a goat in all of human history. The garden holds species together, not as a natural wilderness, but as a managed abundance. Plants, animals, humans, and divine presence share a designed environment. This makes the garden an ideal stage for creation questions. If humanity was made for work, where was that work first imagined? If divine beings shaped life for service, where were such beings placed, tested, named, and assigned? The preserved texts do not give a clear enclosure of experimental species, but the symbolic landscape of Mesopotamia offers gardens, temple estates, sacred groves, and irrigated order as spaces where life is organized under higher authority. Perhaps that is enough for a dream, not proof, a dream with roots. You sense a priest nearby, moving through the garden with measured steps. He inspects offerings of fruit, oil, or grain. The garden supplies the temple, and the temple feeds the gods through ritual presentation. In this loop, plant life becomes sacred service. Human hands tend the plants become offerings. The offerings sustain divine order, the gods preserve fertility, at least when properly honoured. Everyone depends on everyone, though some enjoy better seating. The system is elegant. It is also demanding. A council tablet from later periods might record land, labourers, and produce with brisk precision. Such documents prove that ancient sacred economies were grounded in real administration. Behind every mythic garden stood workers, water rights, measurements, and storage rooms. The divine did not float above accounting. It sat right beside it, probably asking where the dates had gone. You follow a narrow path toward the boundary wall. Outside it, reeds and wild growth begin again. The contrast feels important. Inside is order. Outside is uncontrolled life. Inside, water runs through planned channels. Outside, water wanders. Inside, trees stand in rows. Outside, plants grow by their own stubborn logic. A garden is a statement that the world can be shaped, though never entirely possessed. Maybe this is how ancient people understood creation itself. The gods do not only make, they assign places, they divide waters, they establish roles, they create order by setting boundaries. Humanity, animals, plants, cities, fields, and kingship all gain meaning through placement. To be created is to be located within a system. The strange idea of every species tried by the Anunnaki becomes softer here. Perhaps the old stories are not about failed creatures in a hidden workshop. Perhaps they are about a cosmos learning to become habitable through arrangement. Marsh becomes field. Field becomes garden. Garden becomes offering. Offering becomes relationship. Relationship becomes order. And somewhere in that order, humans stand with muddy feet and upward eyes. The light grows low. The palms turn black against the fading sky. Water continues to move through the channels, whispering over small stones. The garden doesn't answer the old question directly. It does something more haunting. It shows you what ancient creation feels like when translated into landscape. Not a single sudden event, but continuous tending. Not an explosion of life, but a managed abundance. Not freedom without boundaries, but fertility held in a careful hand. Perhaps the first sacred garden was not where humanity began. Perhaps it was where humanity learned its place, among plants that needed tending, animals that needed guiding, gods that needed feeding, and waters that needed restraint. The human being discovered the oldest pattern of civilization. Life must be shaped, or it slips away. Life must be remembered, or it dissolves into mud. Life must be served, even when the servant dreams of rest. The garden darkens. A bird settles in the palm leaves. Somewhere beneath the soil, roots drink in silence. And the old world waits there, before the flood, before certainty, before the broken tablets, holding the faint possibility that creation was not only a making, but a long watching of what each living form would become. Rain begins as a whisper on baked earth, then becomes a language no city can ignore. You stand beneath a sky that has lost its edges. Clouds gather low and bruised above the river plain. The air smells of wet dust, frightened animals, and the first cold breath before a storm breaks open. People look upward from courtyards, fields, and temple steps. At first, perhaps, they are grateful. Rain in a dry land is a blessing, and no one wishes to insult a blessing too early. Then the river rises. The water comes not as a visitor, but as a ruler returning to claim forgotten property. It presses against banks, slips into channels, spreads across fields, and finds every weakness in the work of human hands. Mud brick walls darken, storage rooms leak, pens open, grain swells and spoils. The neat lines of cultivation blur beneath brown force. The world that seemed carefully arranged begins to lose its shape. This is the flood as ancient memory. Mesopotamian flood traditions are among the most famous writings from the ancient Near East. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied Sumerian and Akkadian flood accounts, including the stories of Ziusudra, Atrahasis, and the flood episode later preserved within the Epic of Gilgamesh. These traditions do not all match perfectly, yet they share a haunting pattern. A great destruction comes, a chosen survivor endures. Life begins again under altered conditions. That pattern matters deeply. A flood does not merely kill, it interrupts memory. You imagine a city caught in the rising water. People climb to rooftops, carrying baskets, children, tools, and whatever small household God can be grabbed without causing further divine awkwardness. Goats bleat from unstable platforms. Dogs bark at the water as if stern criticism might improve the situation. Someone shouts from a wall. Someone else answers from a boat already overloaded. The rain keeps falling. The sky gives no explanation. Ancient Mesopotamia knew real floods. The Tigris and Euphrates river systems could be unpredictable. And archaeological layers at various sites have revealed flood deposits from different periods. Scholars are careful not to identify one simple event behind every mythic flood story. The evidence does not permit such tidiness. Still, the land itself taught people that water could erase boundaries with terrifying ease. The mythic flood magnifies that experience into cosmic judgment. In the stories, the flood may come because humans have become too numerous, too noisy, or too disruptive to the gods. That detail is unsettling in a quiet way. Humanity, created to relieve divine labour, becomes a source of irritation. The servant species multiplies. Its sound rises. Its presence disturbs the upper order. The solution is not gentle correction. It is overwhelming water. There is a dark administrative logic here. A problem is created. The problem becomes excessive. The system resets. A fringe interpretation turns this reset into something more secretive. Some modern writers claim the flood was not only punishment, but a deliberate clearing of earlier creations, failed species, hybrid beings, or experimental populations. In that view, the old world before the waters held many kinds of life shaped by divine hands. The flood becomes a cover, a cleansing, a removal of evidence from Earth's surface. It is speculative, dramatic, and far beyond what the tablets directly say. Yet the emotional structure is ancient. The flood divides time before it. Memory grows strange and long. Kings reign for impossible spans. Sages emerge from deep waters. Divine beings seem nearer. The world feels larger, less settled, and more crowded with powers. After it, history becomes somewhat more recognizable. though still wrapped in divine authority. The flood is not only an event, it is a border drawn through imagination. You watch the waters cover a field. A canal disappears beneath the wider current. The carefully tended garden becomes a wavering stain under the flood. Storage jars knock together in a room filling from below. A wooden door breaks loose and turns slowly in the current, absurdly calm, as if it has always wanted to travel. The city becomes fragments. This is what water does to human confidence. It takes the straight line and makes it fluid. It takes the wall and makes it temporary. It takes the archive and asks whether clay tablets were fired, dried, or merely hopeful. Some tablets survive because fire hardens them, while unfired clay can dissolve back into mud. That is a small historical fact with enormous poetic cruelty. Destruction can preserve, while peace may leave no trace. The scholarly debate continues around flood stories and their relationship to physical events. Some researchers emphasize recurring local floods rather than a single universal catastrophe. Others study the stories as literary and theological reflections on divine power, mortality, and the fragility of civilization. Scientific journals and archaeological reports have explored flood deposits, settlement patterns, and environmental change. But myth refuses to become a simple weather report. Myth is not a river gauge. It remembers meaning, not only water level. In the flood tradition, the survivor receives warning through divine favour or secret knowledge. A boat is built. Family, craftsmen, animals, or seeds of life may be preserved, depending on the version. The vessel becomes a floating archive of existence. Everything outside is given to the waters. Everything inside carries the possibility of return. That image holds the listener gently and uneasily. A boat in a flood is a womb, a coffin, and a library. Within it, life waits in darkness. Animal breath warms the enclosed air. Wood creaks. Rain hammers overhead. People whisper because loud voices seem indecent against so much water. Somewhere in that darkness are seeds, tools, memory, fear, and perhaps the last fragile thread connecting the old world to the next one. If any hidden beings existed in the mythic age, this is where they vanish. Not by evidence, but by atmosphere. The flood gives later imagination a reason for absence. Why are there no clear records of strange created forms? The waters took them. Why do the tablets speak in fragments? The waters broke the memory. Why do stories hint at a world before human history fully steadied? The waters divide what can be known from what can only be suspected. A cautious historian would object, rightly, that absence is not proof. A storyteller would answer that absence is still powerful. You stand now at the edge of a drowned plain after the storm has passed. The silence is enormous. Water lies everywhere, reflecting a pale and exhausted sky. Dead reeds lean in one direction. Mud covers the thresholds. Fish move where people once walked. The smell is heavy, full of silt, decay, and fresh beginning mixed together. Nothing is clean. Everything is changed. The flood resets not only the land, but the moral imagination. Humanity survives, but under warning. The gods may need humans, yet humans can become intolerable. Civilization may rise, but it can also be erased. Records may preserve names, but lines can break. The order of the world must be maintained, and even then, it remains vulnerable to forces older than walls. That vulnerability is central to Mesopotamian thought. The cities of the plain were brilliant acts of coordination, but they were never secure. Their people knew famine, flood, war, disease, and political collapse. A mythic flood gathers these fears into one vast image. The whole world becomes a breached canal. The whole human project becomes mud beneath water, and yet the story does not end in water. A bird may be released, a mountain or landing place may appear, an offering may be made. The gods smell the sacrifice, gather, reconsider, and establish new terms for human life. Mortality, limits, and order become part of the restored world. Humanity continues, but not innocently. Survival comes with memory, and memory comes with fear. You feel the damp air settle on your skin. The flood has washed away the ease of beginnings. It has left a world where every structure must be rebuilt with the knowledge that it can fall. Every field must be replanted with the memory that water can return. Every story must be copied before the tablet breaks. Every human life must continue beneath a sky that once opened too far. Perhaps the flood is the greatest hidden timeline of all. It separates the remembered from the almost forgotten. It allows ancient people to imagine that something vast existed before, something only partly carried forward. Kings, sages, cities, creatures, divine decisions, and human purposes all pass through that watery gate. What emerges is not the same as what entered. The rain has stopped now. A single reed stands above the water. The old world lies beneath the silt. Not entirely destroyed, not entirely recoverable. A tablet may surface centuries later. A myth may survive in another language. A seal may preserve a creature no one can name with certainty. A king list may remember reigns too long for ordinary time, and in the hush after the flood, you begin to understand why broken ancient stories feel so alive. They do not merely tell you what was lost, they make you feel loss as a structure within history. They leave you standing on wet ground, listening for voices beneath the water, wondering what kinds of beings, memories, and meanings were carried away when the old world drowned. A dry tablet lies beneath your gaze, and its numbers seem too large for ordinary time. You are standing in a scribal room where a list of kings has been copied with careful hands. The clay is pale, the signs are orderly, and yet the meaning is not calm at all. Names appear in sequence, cities rise into authority, reigns are counted. Then the numbers stretch beyond reason, swelling into thousands and tens of thousands of years, as if history has wandered into a dream and forgotten to return. This is the strange dignity of the Sumerian king list. It does not behave like a modern record. It behaves like memory wearing a crown. The Sumerian king list is a real ancient composition known from several copies. Scholars from Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied it as a major source for Mesopotamian royal ideology. It names cities where kingship was said to reside, then describes how kingship moved from place to place. Some early rulers are given impossibly long reigns, especially those placed before the flood. That is a mainstream historical fact, and it's one of the most haunting facts in ancient literature. Kingship descends from heaven. That phrase is simple. Its consequences are enormous. You imagine the moment as the ancient mind might frame it. Authority does not begin as a committee decision in a dusty city square. It comes down from above, like weather, like command, like a burden wrapped in splendour. A city receives kingship, and for a time it becomes the centre of order. Then kingship moves elsewhere. Another city rises. Another line of rulers stands beneath divine approval. Time is not a straight road. It is a procession of chosen places. The list names cities such as Eridu, Bad Tibera, Larak, Sippar, and Shurupak among the early centres of rule. Their placement before the flood gives them a shimmering distance. They are not imaginary in a simple sense, yet their role in the list is mythic. They stand at the edge where archaeology, memory, and sacred politics blur together. That blur is powerful. It is also dangerous if handled too quickly. A fringe interpretation sees the impossible reigns, and here's a hidden chronology. Perhaps, it says, these long-lived kings were not ordinary humans. Perhaps they were Anunnaki rulers, hybrid descendants, or beings from a period when life itself worked differently. Perhaps the list preserves a memory of a pre-human or partly human civilization governed by those who shaped mankind. The idea is dramatic, and those enormous numbers do invite a certain raised eyebrow. Mainstream scholarship takes another path. Researchers usually understand the long reigns as symbolic, literary, theological, or ideological numbers. They express antiquity, sacred authority, and the grandeur of kingship rather than normal biography. The scholarly debate asks how the list combines mythic time with historical memory, and how later rulers used such traditions to claim legitimacy. Was the list a political tool, a sacred history, a memory structure, or all at once? The clay refuses to choose only one answer. You lean closer to the tablet. The signs sit in rows like small gates. A name, a city, a reign, a transfer of power. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. Kingship was in one city. Then that city fell or lost favour. Kingship went elsewhere. Human history becomes a sacred object passed from hand to hand, never owned forever. That is a humbling idea. No city keeps heaven permanently. The scent of the room is dry clay, lamp oil, and wool. A scribe sits cross-legged, copying from an older tablet. His stylus moves with practiced patience. He may not believe every number in the way a modern person would believe a calendar entry, or perhaps he does. It is hard to know. Ancient belief is not a simple box, and modern certainty is often far too pleased with itself. He copies the past because the past gives order to the present. A king who can place himself within a chain of sacred rule gains more than ancestry. He gains cosmic positioning. He stands within a system where authority descends, moves, and validates. The king list is not just about who ruled, it is about why rule should be believed. That distinction matters. In the hidden timeline of this story, the list becomes a staircase into deep antiquity. Long reigns suggest a time beyond ordinary human scale. Antediluvian cities suggest order before catastrophe. The descent of kingship suggests an arrangement made by gods before humans could claim authorship of civilization. Whether taken as ideology or mystery, the list stretches human history toward a shadowed horizon. You feel that stretch in the body. The mind cannot easily hold 28,000 years of one king's rule. It becomes less a number and more a fog. It says, "This ruler belongs to time unlike yours. This city stands in the age when memory still spoke with divine grammar. This world is not yet measured by the ordinary pulse of fathers, sons, grandsons, and graves." A quirky detail wanders in with a clay tablet tucked under one arm. The king list can be oddly selective. Some historically important rulers are missing, while others are included in ways that serve the text's larger design. So even ancient history had editing choices, which means someone, somewhere, may have been quietly left out of the official narrative. Some things never change. The powerful always prefer a flattering list. Yet the selectiveness reveals purpose. The list is not a neutral archive. It is a shaped memory. That shaped memory gives us a forgotten system. First, kingship descends from heaven. Then it resides in cities. Then catastrophe divides time. Then post-flood rulers continue the chain, though with reigns that gradually become more human in scale. The movement itself feels like a descent from myth into history, from vast sacred time into the more recognizable world of dynasties and conflict. This pattern has fascinated scholars for generations. Some compare it with other ancient Near Eastern traditions that connect kingship to divine approval. Others analyze the numbers for mathematical patterns or symbolic schemes. Still others study how the list reflects competition among city-states, each wanting its place in the sacred story of rule. The debate does not erase the mystery, it gives it architecture. You move through that architecture slowly. The early kings are like pillars disappearing into mist. Their names are preserved, but their bodies are gone. Their cities may be archaeological places, mythic centres, or both at once. The flood stands like a black line across the middle of memory. Beyond it, the long ages glimmer. Within it, everything is reduced, reset, and rearranged. If the Anunnaki represent the divine order behind creation and judgment, then the king list places human authority under that same order. Humanity does not invent kingship in this worldview. Humanity receives it. Rule is not merely social convenience. It is a heavenly institution placed among clay-footed beings who may misuse it, lose it, or be crushed by it. That is almost comforting. Almost. Because a gift from heaven can also be a chain. A king who rules by divine descent may protect order, but he may also claim that disobedience is rebellion against the cosmos. A city that holds kingship may become proud. A people beneath such power may feel both protected and trapped. The same sacred structure that gives meaning can make resistance difficult. The ancient world understood this tension. Royal inscriptions celebrate kings as chosen, mighty, pious, and victorious. Administrative texts record the labour and resources that made such glory possible. Myths speak of gods granting and withdrawing favour. The king list gathers these ideas into a sequence, making history itself appear as a divine rotation of power. You hear the stylus scratch again. The scribe copies another name. Outside, city life continues. Bakers slap dough against oven walls. Merchants argue over weights. Donkeys protest their schedules. Children chase one another between houses. Above them all, the idea of kingship hangs unseen, like a net woven from heaven, temple, army, field, and memory. And this is where humanity's role grows more complicated. Humans were made to labour, yet some humans become kings. Humans serve gods, yet kings claim to represent divine will. Humans are clay, yet kingship descends from heaven and rests upon certain clay bodies more heavily than others. The system does not flatten mankind into one simple category. It ranks, divides, and arranges. The hidden structure becomes clearer. There are gods above. There are divine councils and great powers. There are kings who receive authority. There are sages who transmit wisdom. There are humans who build, farm, carry, sing, mourn, and record. There are animals, monsters, guardians, and symbols at the edges. The king list does not mention every being in this structure, but it reveals how deeply Mesopotamians thought in ordered layers. Nothing stands alone. Every city, ruler, and human task exists within a chain reaching upward into sacred distance. The tablet remains silent under your gaze. Its numbers do not shrink. They continue to feel impossible, and perhaps that is their purpose. They push the imagination away from ordinary history and toward a time when humans felt younger. Gods felt nearer, and kingship itself seemed to fall from the sky like a decree too heavy to refuse. You leave the scribal room in thought, but the list remains behind you. It sits in clay, patiently troubling modern categories. It is not a spreadsheet of ancient rulers, though it can look like one to tired eyes. It is not a simple fantasy either. It is a royal memory machine, carrying fragments of city rivalry, sacred time, flood mythology, political theology, and deep human longing for order. And perhaps, beneath all that, one more quiet suspicion remains. If kingship descended from heaven, then humanity's story was never fully its own. Someone had already arranged the throne. Someone had already measured the cities. Someone had already decided that clay could be ruled, counted, burdened, crowned, and written into a timeline so vast that the mind enters it slowly, like night entering a ruined temple. A wooden yoke creaks in the dark, and the sound becomes a question about purpose. You stand near the edge of a field at first light, where mist clings low over furrows. An ox waits with its head lowered, breath steaming faintly in the cool air. A farmer tightens a strap with practiced hands. Beside him, a dog watches everything with the serious expression of a minor official. Beyond them, the temple rises in the distance, still shadowed, still waiting to be fed. The whole world seems arranged around service. Not in one direction only, everything serves something. The ox serves the plough serves the field serves the storehouse serves the temple serves the gods, in return, preserve fertility, order, kingship, and the hope that the rivers will behave themselves for at least one more season. It is a grand system, though one suspects the ox was not consulted with sufficient respect. Ancient Mesopotamian records confirm that animals, humans, land, and temples were organized through complex systems of labor and distribution. Tablets from temple and palace archives list workers, rations, livestock, fields, and goods with remarkable precision. Scholars at major universities such as Chicago, Pennsylvania, and Oxford have shown how deeply these records reveal the machinery of early urban life. Service was not a vague idea. It was measured in grain, wool, days, bodies, and obligations. That is the firm historical ground. The mystery grows from it. In this world, creatures are understood by what they do. A donkey carries, a sheep produces wool, milk, meat, and offerings. A dog guards, a bull pulls and symbolizes force. Birds can be watched for signs. Fish belong to river and marsh. Humans dig, build, grind, sing, offer, count, and remember. Divine beings rule, receive, judge, and sometimes intervene with alarming confidence. A species is a role wearing flesh. That may be the oldest hidden structure in the story. The ancient texts do not need to describe every animal as an attempted creation by the Anunnaki. The broader worldview already gives each living form a place in a hierarchy of function. Life is not merely alive. Life participates. Every creature has a use, a sign, a danger, or a sacred echo. You move through the field as the day brightens. The ox leans into the plough. The soil opens in dark lines. A man follows, feet sinking slightly into damp earth. Seeds will enter these wounds in the land. Water will be guided later. Birds will arrive to behave badly. Children may be sent to scare them off, usually with mixed success and theatrical shouting. Labour binds every body to every other body. This is where humanity's position becomes delicate. Humans are above many animals in social and ritual importance. Yet humans are also beneath the gods. They command the ox, but they are commanded by the temple. They count sheep, but scribes count them. They feed the gods, but the gods determine whether rain, flood, illness, or invasion will undo the year's work. The hierarchy is not a ladder of comfort, it is a chain of dependence. A quirky fringe tidbit appears like a lizard on a warm wall. Some modern theorists imagine that each ancient creature was designed by higher beings for a specific operational purpose. Sheep become fabric machines, cattle become field engines, dogs become security systems, humans become general servants with inconvenient curiosity. It sounds amusingly modern, like someone has turned creation into a warehouse efficiency chart. Mainstream scholarship does not read the evidence this way. Yet the ancient emphasis on function explains why such theories feel oddly persuasive to some listeners. The texts and records constantly show beings through their roles. Even gods are often known by domains, powers, and offices. One governs fresh water, another storm, another writing, another love, war, or the dead. Divine identity itself is tied to responsibility. The scholarly debate here concerns how ancient Mesopotamians understood divine order through social order. Some specialists argue that myths mirror the structure of temple economies and royal administration. Others emphasize ritual obligation, where humans maintain relationship with the gods through offerings and correct performance. Still others explore the symbolic role of animals as beings that both support and threaten civilization. These readings differ, but each recognizes a culture deeply concerned with ordered service. You step closer to the temple precinct. The sounds grow layered. Sheep shuffle in a pen. A potter turns clay near a wall. Women grind grain with steady rhythm. A scribe calls out a number, and someone repeats it with less enthusiasm. A basket of dates is carried past. Smoke begins to rise from an offering place, pale against the morning sky. Everything moves toward the divine house. A temple was not merely a place of prayer in the modern sense. It was an economic centre, a landholder, a workplace, a storehouse, and a sacred residence. Offerings brought food to the gods, while temple institutions redistributed goods among humans. Animals entered this system alive, counted, sacrificed, consumed, bred, or represented in ritual. Humans entered it as workers, priests, administrators, singers, farmers, and dependents. The temple gathered species into order. That phrase feels strange, but useful. Within its reach, a sheep was not simply a sheep. It was a unit of wool, a possible offering, a breeding animal, a divine asset, a ration source, and a symbol of pastoral abundance. An ox was muscle for the field, wealth for the owner, and sometimes an image of power. A bird might be food, omen, or decorative life. Human beings were more complex, yet even they were recorded by task, status, household, and ration. The old system did not ask who you felt you were inside. It asked what you did in the order. That can feel cold, but it also explains the depth of ancient myth. When humans are created to relieve divine labour, the story fits a world where existence itself is defined through assigned work. A being without function is almost unthinkable. Even monsters have functions. They guard boundaries, they warn, they embody chaos, they test heroes, they mark sacred edges. They are not useless. They are dangerous with purpose. Perhaps this is why hybrid beings do not feel absurd in ancient art. They show mixed functions. A winged guardian watches and crosses spaces. A fish sage brings hidden wisdom into human order. A lion creature carries untamed force into royal imagery. A serpent figure may move between healing, danger, and underworld depth. These beings are not failed drafts of humanity. They are specialized signs within a crowded sacred system. You pause beneath a shade awning where workers receive rations. A clay bowl is filled, grain is measured, oil is poured, a name is called, then marked. The routine is simple, almost sleepy. Yet beneath it lies one of the oldest facts of civilization. People survive when labour can be organised, stored, and redistributed. Myth lifts that practical reality into heaven and says, even the gods require order. The open debate remains whether creation stories justify labour hierarchy or explain it after the fact. Did temple societies use myth to make hard work sacred and unavoidable? Did myths honestly express a worldview in which divine and human dependence were intertwined? Did scribes preserve elite ideology while ordinary workers heard something different beneath the words? No single answer settles comfortably. The field still waits. The ox still pulls. The human still follows. In this ancient pattern, service is not only oppression and not only devotion, it is the glue of reality. Everything gives something. Everything takes something. The gods receive offerings but grant fertility. Humans labour but gain survival, meaning, and place. Animals serve humans, yet humans depend utterly on animal bodies and powers. The system can be unfair, even harsh, but it is not meaningless. The hidden timeline becomes a hidden hierarchy. At the top stand great divine powers, remote and commanding. Below them are lesser gods, sages, guardians, and forces of threshold and knowledge. Below them are kings, priests, scribes, workers, herders, farmers, and families. Around them move animals, plants, rivers, winds, monsters, and omens, each with its own role in the patterned world. You can feel how a later imagination might turn this hierarchy into a creation sequence. Perhaps each class of being was made for a task. Perhaps some were too wild, some too narrow, some too powerful, some too close to the gods. Perhaps humanity was chosen because humans could do many things badly enough to be useful, and strangely enough to be interesting. There is that unsettling human gift. Flexibility. A sheep does not build a temple. A lion does not copy a hymn. A bird does not argue with a tax collector, which may prove birds are wiser than advertised. A human can dig, count, worship, rebel, mourn, invent, obey, and write the story down with mild exaggeration. Humanity's usefulness lies not in perfection, but in range. Maybe that is why the clay creature endures. The morning sun reaches the temple wall, the ox turns at the end of the field. The farmer wipes his forehead and looks toward the city, where the gods are waiting in their high, shadowed rooms. Animals breathe around him, seeds lie in the opened soil. Smoke rises from the sacred enclosure. Everything is serving, everything is being served. And in that slow turning of obligation, the ancient world reveals a system more haunting than a list of failed species. It shows creation as a hierarchy of tasks, where every body is shaped by what it must carry, and humanity stands at the centre not as master, but as the most restless servant in the house of the gods. A low morning bell sounds across the city, and the black-haired people begin to stir. You stand among narrow lanes where mud brick houses press close together, holding the night's coolness inside their walls. A woman lifts a reed mat from a doorway. A child coughs softly in sleep. Somewhere, a donkey objects to existence with impressive emotional commitment. Smoke rises from early ovens, carrying the smell of bread, ash, and damp fuel. The city wakes slowly, but not gently. Work is waiting. In Sumerian texts, people are sometimes called the black-headed people, a phrase often understood by scholars as a poetic or ethnic self-designation used in Mesopotamian royal and religious language. Researchers at major centres such as Yale, Chicago, and Oxford have studied this phrase within hymns, inscriptions, and royal ideology. It does not describe a secret species. It describes humanity, or a people under divine and royal care, seen from within the ancient world's own language. That phrase has a softness to it. It also has weight. The black-headed people are not abstract mankind. They are people with hair, breath, hunger, debts, sore backs, family worries, and prayers muttered while the bread refuses to bake evenly. They are the ones who grind grain before dawn. They carry water from canals. They sweep courtyards. They repair walls. They bring offerings. They raise children beneath temple shadows. The myth of creation becomes ordinary here. Not smaller, more intimate. You move through the lane as the city brightens. Roofs catch gold light. A rooster calls from somewhere, very proud of a son he did not make. A potter turns a vessel on a slow wheel. A brewer checks a jar. Two men argue about a measure of grain with the seriousness of philosophers debating the structure of reality. They may not be wrong. In a city of rations, grain is reality. The great question of humanity's purpose is no longer floating above the rivers. It is walking barefoot through town. If humans were made to serve the gods, this is what that service looks like. Not only dramatic sacrifice, not only solemn hymns before statues. It looks like cleaning, hauling, threshing, counting, cooking, weaving, digging, nursing, teaching, repairing, and enduring. The divine economy depends on thousands of small gestures repeated by people whose names rarely survive. History often keeps the king. Clay often forgets the cook, yet the cook fed civilization. Archaeological research from southern Mesopotamian sites confirms that early urban life required dense cooperation among farmers, herders, craftspeople, administrators, priests, and labourers. Excavations and tablet archives show households, workshops, ration systems, and temple economies all functioning together. This is the mainstream foundation beneath the human story. Civilization was not built by a single ruler's command. It was sustained by ordinary bodies repeating necessary tasks. You hear grainstones grinding. The sound is steady, circular, almost hypnotic. A woman bends over the stone, moving with practiced strength. Her arms know the rhythm, her shoulders know the ache. Flour gathers slowly. Bread will come from this motion, then strength, then more work. The cycle is not grand in the way monuments are grand, but it is older and more honest. The Anunnaki, in the ancient religious imagination, may dwell in regions of authority and judgment, The black-headed people dwell in repetition. This is the human place. A quirky fringe tidbit drifts in wearing a scholar's robe 2 sizes too large. Some modern writers suggest that the phrase black-headed people marks a created servant race, distinct from earlier beings shaped by divine engineers. In this reading, the Sumerians preserve a memory of humanity as a manufactured workforce. Mainstream scholars do not accept that as the plain meaning of the phrase, yet the idea persists because ancient myths do present humans as created within a divine labour system. The phrase becomes a mirror. People look into it and see origin. The scholarly debate is quieter and more grounded. Specialists ask how terms of collective identity functioned in royal inscriptions and hymns. Did the phrase refer broadly to the people of Sumer, to humanity under divine order, or to subjects of a king speaking in sacred formula? Its meaning shifts with context. The safest reading respects that flexibility and avoids turning poetry into a passport category. Still, the words are haunting. The black-headed people, a mass of lives beneath heaven. You enter a courtyard where an old man mends a basket. His fingers are slow but accurate. A young girl watches him, learning without being formally taught. A baby sleeps nearby under a cloth shade. A jar of water sweats in the corner. Chickens scratch at dust with unreasonable optimism. The scene is ordinary enough to be missed, yet it holds the deep answer to why humans matter in these stories. Humans continue. They inherit tasks. They teach hands. They remember songs. They bury their dead and make room for new breath. The gods may create humanity for labour, but human life exceeds its assignment almost immediately. A worker becomes a parent. A grain grinder becomes a singer. A canal digger becomes a storyteller. A shepherd watching sheep under stars becomes someone who wonders why the stars move as they do. The clay creature develops inner weather. That may be the great complication. Service does not prevent consciousness. You stand near a temple stair as people arrive with offerings. Some bring grain, some bring animals, some bring oil, dates, wool, or beer. They are not all equal in wealth or status. Ancient cities carried hierarchy everywhere, sometimes gently, often not. But in the act of bringing goods to the divine house, they participate in a shared pattern. The city feeds its gods, and the gods, in theory, guard the city's life. It is practical devotion. It is sacred logistics. It is also a way of locating oneself in the universe. The black-headed people awaken beneath powers they cannot fully see, yet their daily work makes those powers visible. A temple without offerings is only a building. A god without ritual presence becomes distant. A city without workers becomes ruins in advance. Human action gives form to divine relationship. This is not small. In a sense, humanity sustains the world that supposedly sustains humanity. The old myth says humans were made because gods needed relief. But once made, humans become more than replacements. They become memory keepers, builders of sacred houses, singers of hymns, makers of tablets, preservers of names, and witnesses to divine order. The servant becomes the storyteller. That changes everything. A debate among scholars concerns how ordinary Mesopotamians experienced the religious systems preserved by elite scribes. Did common workers understand myths in the same way temple scholars did? Did hymns reflect widespread belief, official ideology, or both? Written sources often preserve the voices of institutions more clearly than private emotion. Yet archaeology gives glimpses of household shrines, burial customs, tools, toys, ornaments, and daily objects that bring ordinary life nearer. You feel that nearness now. A child runs past with a reed in hand. A woman laughs from a doorway. A man curses at a broken strap, then glances toward the temple as if hoping the gods appreciate the restraint in his vocabulary. The city is not only solemn. No ancient city ever was. It is noisy, tender, unfair, fragrant, crowded, and deeply human. That matters because the creation myth could have reduced people to tools. The city refuses. Every lane shows that humans are not only useful, they're relational. They form households, loyalties, rivalries, jokes, griefs, habits, and hopes. They gather at wells. They trade gossip, they fear illness, they celebrate births. They make offerings not only because systems demand them, but because fear and gratitude seek gestures. The black-headed people are made for work. Perhaps they live for more than work. This is where humanity's role becomes quietly rebellious without raising a sword. A being created to serve begins to ask what service means. A being placed beneath gods begins to imagine the gods in songs. A being assigned to maintain order begins to preserve disorder too, through stories of floods, complaints, divine mistakes, and monsters at the edges. Humans remember what systems prefer to smooth over. A canal may be straight, but a song may curve. The sun rises higher. Heat begins to gather against the walls. The city's early coolness fades, and the day's full burden approaches. People move toward fields, workshops, storehouses, and temple rooms. Their lives are held inside obligations, yet each person carries a private world no tablet can fully count. That is the hidden truth of the black-headed people. They are both category and multitude. To a king, they may appear as subjects. To a temple, as workers and worshippers. To a scribe, as names and rations. To a god, perhaps as servants. But to one another, they are mothers, brothers, neighbours, rivals, lovers, debtors, healers, singers, and the person who borrowed a tool and has been avoiding eye contact for 3 days. The ancient world becomes warmer when seen this way, less like a diagram, more like breath. You stand in the city's brightness and sense humanity, awakening not once, but every morning. Creation is not only the first shaping of clay, it is the daily return of people to their tasks, their words, their worries, their offerings, and their stubborn ability to make meaning under watchful skies. Perhaps that is why the gods needed humans. Not merely because hands could dig canals, not merely because backs could carry loads, but because humans could transform obligation into memory, and memory into a world. The black-headed people rise, work, speak, fear, laugh, and write. They take the divine burden and fill it with human texture. They turn service into civilization. The temple doors open, bread smoke thickens in the lanes. The city enters its day, and the clay-born creature moves through it with tired feet and inward fire. Still serving the gods, still feeding the system, still quietly becoming more mysterious than any creator may have intended. The room smells of wet clay, reed dust, and the faint smoke of a small lamp. You sit inside a tablet house, where young scribes learn to press order into mud. The walls are close. The floor is hard. A teacher watches from the shadows with the calm severity of a man who has seen every possible spelling error and forgiven none of them. Before the students, fresh clay tablets wait like small silent burdens. This is where memory becomes discipline. A boy takes up a reed stylus and copies a line from an older text. His hand is uncertain. His signs lean awkwardly like tired birds. The teacher corrects him. The boy smooths the clay and begins again. Outside, the city moves through heat and noise, but here the world narrows to wedges, lists, hymns, proverbs, and stories older than the student can truly understand. The scribal school was one of the great engines of Mesopotamian culture. Archaeologists have found school tablets from ancient cities, including practice exercises, lexical lists, mathematical problems, model contracts, hymns, and myths. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied these materials as evidence for how writing, administration, and learned tradition were transmitted across generations. The tablet house preserved knowledge through repetition. Repetition sounds dull. It saved worlds. You watch the student copy signs for animals, professions, places, gods, tools, and foods. A list can seem dry to a modern ear, but in a scribal school, lists were ladders. They trained memory. They organized reality. They gave students the power to classify the world in writing. Sheep, ox, donkey, bird, fish, field, canal, temple, king, god. Each sign placed a thing into a mental order. The clay became a map of creation. That matters for the hidden mystery. If myths of divine creation survived through scribes, they did so because generations of students copied them. Not every student copied with full theological terror. Some probably copied because the teacher told them to, which is one of civilization's oldest educational methods. Yet even unwilling copying can carry sacred memory forward. A quirky detail from excavated school tablets adds humanity to the room. Some student tablets are clumsy, crowded, or corrected so heavily that you can almost hear the ancient frustration. A young scribe may have struggled with signs the way a modern student struggles with mathematics. The gods may have created mankind, but they did not spare mankind from homework. There is comfort in that. Very ancient homework. The surviving texts often come from copies made long after the stories first formed. This creates an open scholarly debate. Did scribes preserve ancient myths faithfully, or did each period reshape them to suit new religious, political and literary needs? Researchers at major universities disagree in careful ways. Some emphasize continuity from early Sumerian tradition. Others emphasize transformation in Akkadian and Babylonian settings. The clay gives evidence for both preservation and change. You lean over the student's tablet. A line about a god is copied. A line about a city follows. Then perhaps a fragment from an old creation account, a hymn to a goddess, or a proverb about proper conduct. The student does not know that thousands of years later, strangers will study his exercises under electric light. He only knows that the teacher may inspect his signs, and that mistakes are easier to make than bread. The tablet house teaches more than writing. It teaches hierarchy. The student learns which gods matter in which contexts. He learns old city names. He learns how kings speak of themselves. He learns the correct formulas for contracts, offerings, and praise. He learns that reality can be made official through signs. A spoken thing passes into air. A written thing sits in clay and waits. This waiting gives the ancient world its afterlife. Without scribes, the Anunnaki would be far more shadowed. Without scribes, the flood would drift in rumour. Without scribes, creation from clay and divine substance might have vanished with the voices that first told it. The tablet house is not glamorous, yet it is one of the hidden temples of memory. You hear styluses tapping in a slow pattern. Tap, press, lift. Tap, press, lift. The sound resembles rain beginning on dry ground. Every mark is small, but together they can preserve a myth, a ration list, a lawsuit, a hymn, or a royal boast so large it needs the cooperation of many adjectives. Scribes were practical workers and guardians of tradition at once. They lived between accountancy and eternity, which is a strange commute. In the corner, a teacher may recite a passage about creation. The students repeat it. Some listen with reverence. Some stare into the clay and think about food. This too is part of historical truth. Sacred tradition survives not only through awe, but through routine. A tired student copying a divine name can preserve a mystery better than a passionate dreamer who leaves no record. The fringe imagination, of course, gives the tablet house a darker role. Some modern interpreters imagine scribal schools as places where forbidden knowledge was disguised in myth. They suggest that stories of created beings, hybrid forms, and divine counsels were coded memories of events too dangerous to state openly. In this reading, the scribes were not merely teachers, but keepers of a hidden archive. Mainstream scholars are more cautious. They see scribes as learned professionals operating within temple, palace, and administrative cultures. They copied texts because those texts had educational, religious, literary, and institutional value. Yet even this careful reading is compelling. A professional class preserved stories whose oldest layers may have reached back through oral tradition into periods no tablet can fully recover. That is mystery enough. You notice how copying changes a story without always intending to. A sign may be misread. A phrase may be updated. A god's name may gain emphasis. A local tradition may merge with another. A myth carried from Sumerian into Akkadian may shift tone, texture, and theological meaning. Every act of preservation risks alteration. Memory is never frozen. It is handled. The teacher walks between students, inspecting tablets. His sandals squeak softly against the floor. He pauses behind one boy and points to a sign. The boy lowers his head. The error is scraped away. New clay fills the gap. The sign is pressed again. History, too, is full of such corrections, except many of them are no longer visible. You feel the quiet power of the tablet house gathering around you. It does not create gods, animals, humans, or kings. It creates continuity. It lets later people inherit a world they did not witness. It transforms the fragile breath of story into rows of signs that can survive burial, fire, conquest, and neglect. Still, survival is uneven. Some tablets were broken. Some were lost. Some were never copied. Some were copied many times and changed through that attention. What reaches you is not the whole archive of ancient thought. It is a pattern of survivals, shaped by accident and desire. The tablet house preserves the mystery, but also filters it. That filtering is important. The claim that ancient texts reveal every species the Anunnaki tried to create depends on imagining a complete hidden record. The real record is more fragile, more partial, and in many ways more haunting. It does not reveal everything. It preserves enough to show that ancient people imagined creation as ordered, purposeful, divine, and crowded with beings at the edges of human certainty. You look at the student's tablet as it begins to dry. The signs harden slowly. The clay remembers pressure. A child's exercise becomes a future artifact. A copied myth becomes a doorway. A mistake becomes evidence. A classroom becomes a bridge across 4,000 years. Outside, the city continues without noticing the miracle. Bread bakes. Water moves. Animals complain. Workers carry loads. Priests prepare offerings. Somewhere, a king considers himself divinely chosen with the confidence common to kings. Inside the tablet house, a student presses one more sign and unknowingly helps preserve the oldest questions. Who made humanity? What existed before human memory? Why do the stories speak of divine labour, strange beings, floods, kingship, and clay? The teacher says nothing about mystery. He only tells the student to copy carefully. Perhaps that is the proper instruction for anyone approaching the ancient past. Copy carefully. Read slowly. Do not force the clay to say more than it says. Do not ignore what it whispers either. The lamp flickers. The tablets dry. The young scribes bend over their work. An ancient memory passes through their hands like water through a narrow channel. Losing something, keeping something, and carrying forward just enough darkness for the dream to continue. The lamp flame bends, and older Sumerian shadows lengthen into Babylonian night. You stand in a later city now, where the language of power has changed. Yet the old questions still breathe beneath newer words. Streets are wider in some places, narrower in others, crowded with traders, priests, scribes, porters, and families who still must eat, sleep, argue, pray, and pay attention to the sky. The names on tablets may shift. The gods may be arranged in altered hierarchies, but the clay still waits for pressure. Stories do not vanish all at once. They migrate. A myth first shaped in one tradition can pass into another tongue, another temple, another dynasty, another political need. It may lose details. It may gain splendor. A small local god may become larger. An older figure may be folded into a newer divine family. The story adapts because living cultures are never storage rooms. They are kitchens, and everything left too long near the fire changes flavor. That is not always betrayal, it is survival. Mainstream scholarship confirms that Mesopotamian literature developed through long processes of copying, translation, adaptation, and reinterpretation. Sumerian compositions continue to be studied after Sumerian ceased to be spoken as an everyday language. Akkadian scribes preserved, reworked, and expanded older themes in Babylonian and Assyrian contexts. Researchers at Yale, Oxford, and Chicago have shown how learned tradition carried ancient material across centuries. The result is not a single pure voice, it is a chorus. You hear that chorus in the dark. One voice speaks of divine labour, another tells of clay and blood, another remembers a flood sent against noisy humankind, another places kings before the waters, reigning for spans too vast for normal memory, another raises a city god into cosmic command, rearranging older patterns under a newer throne. The hidden mystery does not remain still. It changes shape like a figure seen through oil smoke. Sumerian themes drift into Akkadian narratives. Akkadian texts reshape inherited material. Babylonian theology gathers earlier fragments and builds a grander architecture around them. This is how ancient memory becomes layered, like mud laid down by successive floods. You enter a scribal library. Shelves hold tablets of different sizes, some broad and flat, some small enough to fit in the palm. A colophon may name a scribe, a tablet series, a palace, or a temple collection. The room smells of clay, wool, dry reed, and lamp soot. Somewhere, a scholar priest recites lines in a learned tongue that ordinary market people may not fully follow. Knowledge has become specialized. The past has become an educated craft. The old stories gain distance. Distance creates authority. It also creates mystery. A quirky fringed tidbit slips across the threshold with dramatic confidence. Some modern interpreters argue that as Sumerian traditions passed into Babylonian hands, evidence of Anunnaki creation experiments was deliberately hidden beneath theology. They claim that earlier records of species making became mythic monsters, divine genealogies, and symbolic fragments. It is a bold suggestion, and bold suggestions do enjoy the advantage of sounding important while avoiding the inconvenience of proof. Still, the transformation of tradition is real. That is the important part. Ancient scribes did reinterpret older material. They did align inherited stories with new divine politics. They did preserve older names beside newer systems. The scholarly debate concerns how much was preserved faithfully, how much was reshaped, and how much was newly composed from older motifs. Specialists disagree over details, but they agree that Mesopotamian tradition was not frozen. It was curated, taught, revised, and renewed. You move toward a tablet bearing a creation account from later Babylonian tradition. Its world is more elaborate, more cosmic, more ceremonial. Divine conflict may precede order. A victorious god may fashion the world from chaos. Humanity may still be made to serve divine needs. The details differ from older creation materials, yet the underlying concern remains familiar. How does order arise? Why do gods require human service? What place does mankind occupy in a cosmos already filled with powers? The answer is never purely sentimental. Humans serve. Humans worship. Humans maintain the divine order through offerings and ritual. The old labour theme survives, though dressed in different robes. That continuity matters more than any single sensational claim. Across Mesopotamian traditions, humanity often appears not as the first wonder of creation, but as a functional solution within a divine world. The exact gods vary. The literary forms shift. The theological emphasis changes. Yet the human role remains tied to service, food offerings, temple order, and the relief or maintenance of divine systems. You can almost see the stories passing from hand to hand. A student copies an old Sumerian hymn. A Babylonian scholar comments on a traditional god list. An Assyrian scribe files tablets in a royal collection. A priest recites a creation epic during a festival. Each act gives the old material new life and new meaning. The story is never simply repeated. It is placed into a new room with new listeners, and the room changes the echo. This is how fragments from Babylonian shadows preserve Sumerian bones. The body is not identical. The skeleton remains. In the library, you notice tablets of lexical lists, omens, rituals, myths, prayers, and royal inscriptions. The learned world is dense with classification. Gods are listed in families and equivalences, signs are explained, omens are arranged, rituals are prescribed. The universe appears as something that can be sorted, copied, and consulted, though never completely controlled. This system invites the idea of hidden categories. A modern reader looking for created species sees lists everywhere and wonders whether one missing list held the secret. A list of gods, a list of animals, a list of omens, a list of kings. Why not a list of experimental beings? The thought has a strange seduction. Mesopotamia loved lists, and mystery loves a missing page. But careful reading must remain steady. No surviving Sumerian or Babylonian text provides a complete roster of species made and rejected by the Anunnaki. What does survive is subtler, and perhaps more profound. A set of traditions where divine beings shape order, assign labour, create humanity for service, preserve knowledge through sages, mark abnormal bodies as signs, and imagine time before the flood as larger than ordinary history. That is not a catalogue. It is a worldview. The open debate is how to interpret that worldview without crushing it under modern desire. Some scholars emphasize social realities, where myth reflects labour obligations, temple economies, and royal ideology. Others focus on theology, where stories explain the relationship between humans and gods. Others explore literary artistry, tracing how motifs change across languages and periods. Each approach illuminates part of the shadow. None owns the whole darkness. You stand near a tablet that has cracked along one side. A line survives, then breaks away. The missing portion seems to invite every theory ever invented. A cautious scholar sees damage. A fringe writer sees concealment. A tired museum visitor sees a very old object in need of better lighting. All three responses reveal something about the person looking. The clay remains clay. It does not flatter anyone. Babylonian shadows add one more complication. Later texts often become grander, more systematized, more cosmic in scope. The earlier world of city gods and local cults can be absorbed into larger theological narratives. This process may make ancient stories feel more universal, but it also places older fragments under newer authority. A god who once belonged to one city may become part of a cosmic genealogy. A mythic role may be reassigned. A familiar theme may serve a different political purpose. Memory becomes empire's instrument. Yet memory also resists. Older names cling to the surface. Older motifs keep returning. The flood survives. The deep survives. The clay survives. The burden of divine service survives. The strange beings at the edge of categories survive, carved, copied, invoked, or whispered in ritual forms. Even when reshaped, they do not disappear. That persistence is the true hidden timeline, not a secret sequence of laboratory attempts, but a long movement of ideas through changing civilizations. Sumerian roots feed Akkadian branches, Babylonian and Assyrian leaves spread wide. Later readers, ancient and modern alike, gather beneath that tree and imagine what lies underground. The library grows darker. A scribe covers a tablet with cloth. Outside, the city's evening sounds rise gently. Wheels creak. Voices fade. Dogs move between doorways. A priest carries a lamp toward a shrine. The past is no longer one voice, and perhaps it never was. It is a layered murmur, older than any single city's pride. You listen for the Anunnaki in that murmur. They are not always at the centre. Sometimes they are part of divine assemblies, sometimes powers of judgment, sometimes names carried by tradition into changing systems. Modern fascination has made them louder than many ancient contexts allow. Yet the broader Mesopotamian world around them remains full of creation, service, hierarchy, flood, kingship, strange beings, and sacred order. That world does not need exaggeration to feel immense. It already is. The tablets in Babylonian shadow do not reveal a clean forbidden list. They reveal the way ancient stories survive by changing. They show you that origins are never held in one moment, or one language, or one perfect tablet. They are carried through schools, temples, kingdoms, translations, and hands that copy carefully under fading light. Perhaps the hidden truth is not that everything was concealed. Perhaps the hidden truth is that everything was transformed, and in that transformation, the old creation mystery grew softer, deeper, and harder to solve. The species became symbols. The symbols became rituals. The rituals became school texts. The school texts became museum objects. The museum objects became questions in the dark, where your mind follows the clay trail and hears, beneath the Babylonian night, the older Sumerian silence still breathing. A glass cabinet reflects your face beside the clay, and two kinds of belief stare back. One belongs to the scholar, cautious and patient, measuring each sign against grammar, context, date, and parallel text. The other belongs to the dreamer, restless and hungry, asking whether the broken lines conceal something larger than approved history allows. They stand together in the same room, not enemies exactly, but uneasy neighbours sharing the same ancient silence. The room is bright. The questions are not. You are surrounded by catalogue numbers, museum labels, excavation reports, photographs, transliterations, and careful translations. Nothing here looks forbidden. Nothing glows. Nothing whispers unless the ventilation system needs maintenance. Yet the deeper you look, the more you notice that ancient Mesopotamia has become a battleground of interpretation. One tablet can generate a lecture, a theory, a documentary, a conspiracy, and a very heated comment section before breakfast. This is the modern afterlife of the Anunnaki. In mainstream scholarship, the Anunnaki are divine beings within Mesopotamian religion, connected with assemblies, underworld associations in some traditions, and cosmic authority depending on period and text. Researchers at universities such as Chicago, Yale, Oxford, and Pennsylvania approach them through philology, archaeology, comparative literature, and religious history. Their work relies on recoverable evidence. Words must be read in language. Objects must be dated. Claims must be restrained by what survives. That restraint is not boring. It is a discipline against fantasy. Yet fantasy has its own strange gravity. In popular culture, the Anunnaki often appear as ancient astronauts, genetic engineers, creators of humanity, or rulers of a hidden prehistory. The claim that they tried to create every species belongs largely to this modern speculative tradition. It is not supported as a direct statement in Sumerian texts. Still, it persists because it transforms ancient ambiguity into a dramatic system. People like systems, especially secret ones. A quirky tidbit belongs here. Some fringe books and online retellings treat the Anunnaki as if the Sumerians had left behind technical manuals disguised as myth. A phrase about clay becomes genetic matter. A divine assembly becomes a command center. A temple becomes a landing facility. A fish sage becomes an amphibious visitor. At some point, even a humble sheep may begin to look suspicious, which is admittedly a lot of pressure for a sheep. The scholarly response is usually firm. Mesopotamian texts were written within ancient religious and literary worlds, not modern scientific categories. Translation matters, genre matters, scribal tradition matters. A hymn is not a blueprint. A myth is not an excavation report. A symbolic creature is not automatically a species entry. When these distinctions are ignored, the ancient world is made to speak in a voice it never used, and yet dismissal alone can feel thin, because popular fascination often begins with a real encounter. The tablets truly are ancient. The creation stories truly are strange. The gods truly make humans for service in some traditions. The king list truly gives impossible reigns. Hybrid beings truly appear in art. The flood truly divides mythic time. Sages truly bring knowledge from deep or distant origins in later tradition. These facts are enough to disturb the surface of modern confidence. The problem is not curiosity. The problem is certainty too quickly earned. You stand before a display of cylinder seals, tablets, and relief images. A museum curator might explain them with measured care. A fringe interpreter might arrange them into an exciting hidden pattern. The scholar asks what the evidence permits. The theorist asks what the evidence could imply if every gap were filled in the most dramatic way possible. Both begin at the same glass case. Only one carries a parachute into speculation, and sometimes forgets to check whether it opened. A gentle pause settles. The clay does not take sides. The open scholarly debate is not whether the Anunnaki were spacefaring engineers. That is not a live debate in professional Assyriology. The real debates are subtler and far more interesting. How did divine genealogy shift across cities and centuries? How did scribes understand older Sumerian texts in later periods? How did myths about human creation reflect temple labour, social hierarchy, and theological imagination? How do hybrid images function in ritual, royal, and protective contexts? These questions do not shout. They endure. Prestigious research institutions have built entire fields around such patient questions. Excavation records from Iraq, museum collections in London and Philadelphia, and university publications all contribute to a slow reconstruction of ancient life. The process is not glamorous in the cinematic sense. It involves broken tablets, uncertain readings, disputed signs, and footnotes with the emotional range of a tax form. Yet through that labour, ancient voices become more audible. You can respect that labour. The scribes did their work. The scholars do theirs. Both handle fragile signs. Still, there is a reason forbidden readings attract listeners at night. They offer a feeling of hidden coherence. They suggest that the scattered evidence is not scattered at all, but intentionally veiled. They turn missing lines into secrets, damaged artifacts into clues, and symbolic beings into survivors of a suppressed record. Such readings give the past the structure of a locked room. That can be thrilling. It can also be misleading, because history is often not a locked room. It is a collapsed house. You do not always find a hidden chamber behind the broken wall. Sometimes you find mud, ash, pottery, and a storage jar whose contents were regrettably ordinary. The past does not become less valuable because it refuses to behave like a thriller. In fact, it becomes more human. You walk through the gallery and notice how each label compresses a world. Date, place, material, description, a god's name, a possible function, a cautious phrase such as probably, perhaps, or associated with. These words are not weakness, they are honesty. Ancient evidence rarely permits absolute claims. The responsible interpreter leaves room for uncertainty without handing the whole room to invention. That balance matters for this story. It allows the Anunnaki to remain ancient beings of Mesopotamian religion without becoming convenient puppets for every modern theory. It allows creation myths to remain profound without pretending they are genetic records. It allows hybrid creatures to remain powerful symbols without turning every carved wing into a biological report. It allows mystery to exist without pretending mystery is proof. Perhaps that is the hardest lesson. Not all uncertainty confirms the most exciting answer. A missing sign is not always a cover-up. A strange image is not always evidence of a creature. A long reign is not always a literal lifespan. A divine descent is not always a spacecraft. Sometimes ancient people used myth because myth was the proper language for truths about power, labour, mortality, fear, order, and human smallness. That does not make the stories less real. It makes their reality different. You feel the air cool near another case. Inside it rests a tablet with lines about gods and humans, copied by hands that never imagined modern arguments. The scribe did not write for skeptics or believers in distant centuries. He wrote within a living tradition, shaped by teachers, temples, and the weight of inherited words. His purpose may have been educational, ritual, literary, or devotional. It was not to settle debates on glowing screens. There is something peaceful in that. The tablet owes you nothing. The fringe reader wants revelation. The scholar wants evidence. The storyteller wants atmosphere. The sleeping listener may want only a path through wonder that does not insult intelligence. The ancient tablet can satisfy none of these completely, yet it gives each one enough to continue. This is why the boundary between archaeology and speculation must remain visible. Without archaeology, speculation floats away into mist. Without imagination, archaeology can become a cabinet of labelled stones with the life drained out. The best path is neither blind belief nor dry dismissal. It is a slow walk between clay and dream. You pause at the far end of the gallery. A guard shifts in his chair. The floor shines faintly. Outside, modern traffic moves with its own impatient mythology. Inside, the Anunnaki remain under glass, not as alien engineers, not as solved symbols, but as part of an ancient religious world whose depth continues to attract both scholarship and longing. The hidden truth may be simpler than the forbidden theories claim. Ancient people already imagined humanity as made, assigned, watched, and dependent. They already filled the cosmos with beings above, below, and between. They already preserved timelines stretching beyond ordinary memory. They already believed that bodies, storms, stars, animals, kings, and disasters could carry divine meaning. No spaceship is required for the world to feel strange. No laboratory is required for clay to feel alive. The cabinet reflection returns to your face. You are modern, but not free from myth. You also live among systems that explain your place. You also seek hidden causes behind visible events. You also distrust official labels when the silence feels too deep. Perhaps that is why the Anunnaki have become so powerful in modern imagination. They gather old religious awe and modern suspicion into one shadowed name. The museum lights remain steady. The clay remains still. Between scholars and forbidden readings, the ancient past waits with remarkable patience. It does not need to be solved quickly. It asks to be approached with care, curiosity, humility, and perhaps a little less confidence than the loudest voices prefer. And as you leave the glass cabinet behind, one thought follows quietly. The greatest mystery may not be what the tablets hide from us, but why we so badly need them to hide something at all. A carved serpent lies beside a winged figure, and the question changes shape again. You're no longer asking only what the creature is. You're asking what kind of truth a creature can carry. The seal impression rests in the clay like a pressed dream. Horns, wings, claws, scales, hands, and human faces appear together, not as a mistake, but as a language. The ancient artist has arranged bodies the way a scribe arranges signs. Every form means something. That thought slows the room. Modern people often separate species from symbol. A lion is an animal first, then perhaps a metaphor for courage. A bird is a bird first, then perhaps a sign of freedom. In ancient Mesopotamia, the separation was less comfortable. A creature's visible nature could already be sacred speech. A bull's strength, a serpent's hidden movement, a bird's crossing of the sky, and a fish's life beneath water all belong to a larger grammar of meaning. A body was not silent. It spoke by existing. Mainstream scholarship supports this careful reading. Art historians and Assyriologists from institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have shown that Mesopotamian animal and hybrid imagery must be interpreted through ritual, mythological, political, and artistic contexts. A composite being on a seal may signal protection. divine authority, liminal power, or a connection to a specific mythic world. It is rarely just decoration, and rarely just zoology. This is where the phrase created species begins to loosen. A species, in modern thought, is defined through biological descent, reproduction, anatomy, and genetics. The ancient texts and images do not operate in that framework. They speak through role, domain, power, function, and sacred relation. A serpent creature might represent underworld depth, danger, renewal, healing, or divine mystery. A winged being may signify motion between realms. A horned crown may mark divine status, not animal ancestry. The evidence asks for symbolic literacy. Not a microscope, a quirky fringe tidbit appears in the corner, adjusting its imaginary spectacles. Some modern theories treat every hybrid image as literal record, as though ancient artists were drawing from life with scientific accuracy. A winged human becomes an aerial species. A fish-cloaked sage becomes an amphibian being. A lion-bodied guardian becomes a genetic combination. The result is exciting, certainly, but also rather unfair to ancient artists, who were perfectly capable of symbolism without needing a laboratory in the basement. Still, symbolism should not be treated as lesser truth. That is an important correction. A symbol can preserve what ordinary description cannot. It can compress fear, memory, power, status, and theology into one form. When a Mesopotamian artist gives a figure wings, the wings may not say this creature flew around the courtyard bothering pigeons. They may say the being crosses boundaries. They may say it belongs to realms beyond ordinary walking life. They may say human categories are insufficient. The symbol is not false. It is dense. You stand in a long room lined with impressions of seals, reliefs, and small figurines. The lamplight makes the creatures seem to shift when your eyes move. One figure has a human shape but a bird-like head. Another bears horns that connect it to divinity. Another combines the strength of a lion with the posture of a guardian. None behaves like a normal animal. None needs to. They occupy the threshold. Threshold beings are common in ancient religious imagination because thresholds are dangerous places. A doorway separates inside from outside. A city wall separates order from wildness. A riverbank separates land from water. A temple separates ordinary space from divine residence. A human body separates animal life from conscious speech. Wherever a boundary matters, the imagination places a watcher. Hybrid figures are watchers of meaning. They stand where categories might fail. The scholarly debate often asks whether specific hybrid beings should be linked with named mythological figures, protective spirits, astral symbolism, or broader visual traditions shared across the ancient Near East. Some images appear repeatedly enough to suggest stable meanings. Others remain uncertain. Researchers compare seals, reliefs, texts, and archaeological contexts, but the final answer can remain partial. The ancient world does not always provide a caption, which is inconsiderate but very on brand. You move close to a guardian figure. Its body feels impossible, yet its purpose feels clear. It does not ask to be classified in a modern field guide. It asks to be encountered as a force. It protects, warns, mediates, or displays power. It may not belong to nature. It belongs to order's edge. Perhaps this is the deeper answer to the species question. The so-called created beings may not be failed biological forms at all. They may be sacred metaphors for different kinds of power in the cosmos. The animal kingdom, the divine assembly, the human city, and the monstrous borderlands become parts of one symbolic ecology. Everything has a form because everything has a role. A lion means untamed strength. A bull means fertile force and labouring power. A serpent means hidden movement and dangerous knowledge. A bird means height, omen, and crossing. A fish means depth, concealment, and wisdom from water. A human means speech, service, memory, and restless self-awareness. Combine these forms, and the ancient imagination creates beings that carry more than one truth at once. A fishman is not necessarily a species. It may be wisdom leaving the depths. A winged guardian is not necessarily a mutation. It may be protection that crosses unseen space. A human-headed animal is not necessarily a failed attempt at mankind. It may be controlled wildness under divine authority. The old artists knew how to think with bodies. That phrase feels important. You let it settle. In modern life, symbols have become thinner in many places. A logo points to a company. An icon points to an application. A warning sign points to danger. Ancient symbols could be heavier. They did not merely point, they participated. A protective figurine placed under a threshold was not just a reminder of safety. It was part of the act of making the space safe. Image, ritual, and belief work together. That is why interpreting them requires care. If you make every image literal, you lose the ritual imagination. If you make every image decorative, you lose the sacred force. The middle path is slower and far more interesting. You look again at the serpent. Its body curves in a line that feels older than writing. Serpents shed skin, vanish into holes, move without limbs, and appear suddenly where no one invited them. Naturally, humans have given them symbolic importance across many cultures. In Mesopotamia, serpent imagery can connect with healing, danger, underworld powers, or divine figures, depending on context. No single meaning can be pasted over every example. The creature resists simplification. As all good serpents do, a debate continues over whether certain serpent and dragon forms in Mesopotamian art reflect chaos monsters, protective beings, natural observation, or theological imagination. Some later traditions name specific mythic creatures, others leave images unnamed. The uncertainty does not weaken the symbol. It lets the symbol breathe across time. You begin to notice a pattern in the room. Every hybrid form seems to answer a human anxiety. What protects the doorway? What explains sudden disaster? What carries divine wisdom? What marks royal strength? What guards the dead? What separates sacred from ordinary? What happens when categories fail? The answer is not always a doctrine. Sometimes it is a creature, a body made of meanings. This is why the claim that the Anunnaki created every species may feel too narrow. It reduces a vast symbolic world to a sequence of manufacturing attempts. The older material is stranger because it does not separate biology, theology, art, and social order into clean boxes. It lets animals, gods, humans, and monsters form a single field of signs. Creation is not only how bodies begin, it is how meanings attach to bodies. That makes the ancient world more immersive, more unsettling too. You are not walking among creatures arranged by anatomy. You are walking among forces wearing anatomy. The bull is strength under harness. The sheep is abundance under counting. The fish is hidden wisdom beneath water. The bird is the unreachable sky made visible for a moment. The human is clay that speaks and suffers. The monster is the sign that no system can close every border. The room grows dimmer. The seal impression dries in your hand. Its creature remains fixed. Yet the meaning shifts whenever you approach from a different angle. A scientist would ask what species it is. A priest might ask what power it carries. A scribe might ask what tradition names it. A king might ask whether it protects his throne. A modern dreamer might ask what ancient secret it hides. Perhaps each question reveals the questioner. The clay does not laugh, which is kind. It simply holds the image, and in that patient holding, you begin to understand that the ancient beings carved, copied, and imagined across Mesopotamia may not be failed forms waiting to be explained away. They may be sacred metaphors that refuse to die because they still perform their oldest work. They guard the edges of thought. They make the familiar strange. They remind you that every body, human or animal or impossible, may be carrying a meaning deeper than its shape. A bowl of grain rests before a divine statue, and the room becomes very still. You stand inside the inner space of a temple, where daylight enters only in softened strips. The air smells of incense, oil, old wood, and baked offerings. A lamp trembles near the wall. The statue does not move, of course, yet the room behaves as if it might. Every gesture is careful, every footstep lowers itself. Even the dust seems to understand protocol. Here, humanity's purpose becomes intimate. Not grand in the way kings prefer, not loud in the way armies announce themselves. A priest places bread, beer, dates, or roasted meat before the god. The offering is physical, fragrant, and real. This is not merely a symbol in the modern thin sense. The food matters, the act matters, the correct order matters. The divine presence is treated as a living power within the sacred house, and human service keeps the relationship alive. Ancient Mesopotamian temples were maintained through daily rituals, offerings, personnel, and supplies. Records studied by scholars at Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and Pennsylvania confirm that temple life required complex administration and constant human labour. Food, drink, textiles, animals, oil, and incense moved through sacred economies. This is the solid historical ground beneath the quiet. The gods were served through systems that filled storerooms and shaped entire communities. The offering table is a small world. Everything leads toward it. A farmer plants grain, a canal worker guides water, a herder tends animals, a brewer prepares beer, a baker shapes bread, a scribe records quantities, a porter carries baskets, a priest presents the food, the god receives, the city hopes the order holds. What looks like one ritual is really the final visible point of countless human motions. This is why humanity was useful to the gods. At least, that is what the old stories suggest. Humans can transform the raw world into ordered service. They can take mud, seed, water, animal strength, fire, song, number, and memory. Then arrange them toward a sacred purpose. A sheep cannot do this. A lion will not do this. A serpent has other priorities. A human can stand between earth and heaven, carrying things upward while remaining stubbornly mortal. That middle position defines humanity. It is both privilege and burden. You sense the weight of it in the temple room. The divine statue has been clothed, fed, honoured, and addressed with titles polished by tradition. The god's house must be maintained as carefully as any elite residence, though with far more anxiety if something goes wrong. A missed offering is not just poor scheduling, it threatens a relationship with forces that control fertility, health, kingship, storm, and fate. No pressure, naturally. The fringe imagination reads this service in a sharper way. Some modern theorists suggest that humans were engineered by the Anunnaki as a labour species, created to mine, farm, build, and supply their masters. In that vision, temple offerings are the softened memory of an older servitude. The gods once demanded practical work directly, and ritual later disguised the original arrangement. It is speculative, but it draws strength from the ancient theme that humanity was made to serve divine needs. Mainstream scholarship reads the ritual world differently. It sees worship, theology, economy, and political order intertwined. The gods required care because ancient divine presence was imagined through temple residence. Human beings honoured that presence through offerings, hymns, purification, festivals, and maintenance. The debate centres on how ritual service shaped society, and how society shaped the myths that explained it. Did humans serve because myth said they were created for service? Or did myth arise because service already organised life? The question turns slowly, like a millstone. You move deeper into the sanctuary, like the floor is cool beneath your feet. A curtain stirs faintly, somewhere behind you. A singer begins a low chant. The words are measured, not hurried. They give honour, request favour, and place human breath within an inherited pattern. The singer's voice is fragile, yet the tradition it carries is vast. Perhaps this is the part the labour myth cannot fully contain. Humans were made to work, yes, in the old story. But ritual turns work into relationship. A basket of grain becomes an offering. A slaughtered animal becomes sacred food. A woven garment becomes divine clothing. A song becomes communication with powers beyond the city wall. Even exhaustion can be gathered into meaning when placed within ritual order. That does not make the burden light. It makes it bearable enough to continue. Ancient people did not usually separate religion from economics, politics, or household life as modern people often try to do. The temple touched fields, workshops, herds, festivals, calendars, and royal legitimacy. It was a place where heaven and logistics met. The result could be beautiful, exploitative, comforting, and demanding all at once. Human purpose lived inside that mixture. You look at the statue's face, polished by lamplight. Its eyes may be inlaid, wide and watchful. The god does not need to blink. That is unsettling, but also useful for a statue. Before it, humans bring the best they can gather, or at least what the records say they are supposed to gather. In exchange, they seek stability in a world always threatening to dissolve into flood, famine, illness, invasion, or royal nonsense. The relationship is practical devotion, a bargain with eternity. A council of scholars might phrase the open debate carefully. Mesopotamian creation stories can be read as theological explanations for human service, as reflections of labour organisation, as literary meditations on divine dependence, or as elite justifications for social hierarchy. Each reading has evidence. Each misses something when isolated. The old texts are not flat enough for a single answer. That is good. Flat stories do not survive this long. A small quirky detail belongs in the sanctuary's edge. Some temple rituals treated divine statues as living presences that could be washed, clothed, fed, and entertained. Imagine being a god and having an entire staff devoted to your meals and wardrobe. It sounds luxurious, until you remember that statues cannot scratch their own noses. Immortality has its drawbacks. Apparently, the humour fades gently, because the care given to divine statues reveals a deeper human need. People wanted the divine close enough to feed, dress, praise, and petition. A god entirely beyond reach might be powerful, but terribly lonely to worship. The temple made cosmic forces local. It allowed humans to act toward the unseen through visible forms. This may be the quiet purpose of mankind in Mesopotamian thought. To mediate. Humans mediate between wild water and planted field, between animal body and sacred meal, between clay earth and written word, between divine command and daily obedience, between death and memory, between fear and ritual. The created human is not merely a tool. A tool does not sing to its maker. A tool does not worry about whether the maker is displeased. A tool does not preserve myths on clay or wonder whether the gods themselves once grew tired. Humans are useful because they can serve, but they are mysterious because they know they serve. That awareness changes the service. An ox pulls because it is guided. A human carries because the system says carry, but also because the human can understand, resist, accept, resent, bless, joke, pray, and remember. The human being adds inwardness to labour. That inwardness may be the unplanned spark in the clay. You stand quietly as the offering smoke rises. The smoke curls upward in delicate threads. It carries scent more than substance, and yet scent is powerful. It fills the room, enters the body, marks the hour, and disappears without vanishing completely. Human service is like that. Most of it leaves no monument. It passes into days, meals, repairs, songs, and children who learn the motions. Still, civilization is made from such vanishing things. The Anunnaki, the great gods, the divine councils, and the shadowed beings of myth all belong to the upper architecture of the ancient imagination. But that architecture stands only because human hands keep touching the lower stones. The temple wall is repaired. The offering is brought, the tablet is copied, the canal is cleared, the dead are named, the child is taught. This is a haunting answer to why humans were made, not because humans are strongest, not because humans are purest, because humans can bind worlds together through repeated acts of meaning. The sanctuary darkens slightly as the lamp lowers. The offering remains before the god. Outside, the city's labour continues without knowing where one task ends and another begins. Sacred service flows into ordinary survival. Ordinary survival rises back into sacred service. The circle closes, then opens again. Perhaps humanity's role was never only obedience. Perhaps it was participation in a cosmos that needed witnesses as much as workers. The gods could command, but humans could remember the command. The gods could receive offerings, but humans could turn offering into story. The gods could shape clay, but clay, once breathing, could look back toward its maker with questions in its eyes. The room holds that question. The statue remains silent. The grain cools in its bowl, and in the quiet purpose of mankind, you feel the ancient mystery become softer and deeper. Humanity is made to serve, yes, but also to connect, to translate, to preserve, and to wonder why service feels so much like sorrow and devotion woven into the same thread. A broken edge of clay catches the light, and the missing piece becomes almost unbearable. You stand over a tablet where the surviving lines are careful, measured, and incomplete. A god is named, then the surface breaks. A phrase begins, then disappears. A city is mentioned, but the next sign is gone. The clay does not explain what was lost. It only shows the wound where meaning once continued. This is where the tablets become most honest. They do not tell everything. They cannot. Ancient Mesopotamian writing survives unevenly, shaped by accident, excavation, destruction, copying, burial, fire, and loss. Scholars at universities such as Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and Pennsylvania work with fragments constantly. A full text is precious. A nearly full text is fortunate. A broken text is normal. The ancient record is not a library handed down in order. It is a field of scattered pieces lifted from dust. That fact matters more than any dramatic theory. Silence is part of the evidence. You lean closer to the damaged tablet, and the room seems to quiet around it. The broken surface is rough, pale, and dry. It looks almost newly wounded, though centuries have passed over it like wind over a deserted road. Your mind wants the missing signs. It wants the line to finish itself. It wants the god to speak plainly, the myth to reveal its design, the hidden system to name every creature and every purpose. The tablet refuses. Very ancient behaviour, really. The Sumerian and Akkadian texts that survive about creation, kingship, divine labour, floods, sages, rituals, and strange beings are powerful but partial. They come from specific places, periods, scribal settings, and institutional contexts. They do not preserve every story told in homes, every ritual performed in temples, every local myth sung beside canals, or every private fear whispered at night. Writing was selective. Survival was even more selective. The result is not a complete mirror of ancient life. It is a constellation, bright points in darkness. This is why claims of certainty must move carefully. The statement that Sumerian texts reveal every species the Anunnaki tried to create promises more than the record can honestly give. No surviving text provides that complete revelation. No recovered tablet lists a sequence of divine experiments across all living beings. What the record offers is different. It gives creation myths, divine hierarchies, symbolic animals, hybrid figures, omen traditions, antediluvian kings, and deep questions about why humans exist. That is already vast. It does not need to pretend completeness. A quirky fringe tidbit rises from the silence. Some speculative writers treat missing tablet sections as the most important parts of the story, because whatever is gone can be imagined as the forbidden chapter. It is an efficient method, in its way. Broken corner, hidden evidence, lost tablet, suppressed truth, untranslated sign, cosmic secret. One begins to suspect that ancient damage has become a very generous co-author, yet the emotional temptation is real. Gaps call to the imagination. A scholar might say the open debate concerns reconstruction, transmission, and interpretation. How much can be restored from parallel manuscripts? When does a restoration become too bold? How do translators mark uncertainty without losing readability? How should damaged myths be discussed when only fragments remain? These questions are technical, but they carry deep philosophical weight. They decide how much voice the dead are allowed to have. You imagine a scholar at a desk late at night. A photograph of a tablet lies open. A transliteration sits nearby. Reference volumes form a quiet wall of expertise. The scholar studies one sign, compares another copy, reads a parallel phrase, then adds a cautious bracket where the ancient line has broken. It is slow work, almost monk-like, not glamorous, unless one has unusually refined taste in damaged syllables. But this labour protects the past from careless possession. It says, here we know, here we suspect, here we do not know. That last phrase is sacred in its own way. You move through the darker archive of what was not preserved. There were songs never written. There were images carved in wood that rotted away. There were clay tablets dissolved by rain before anyone baked them. There were temple rooms emptied by invaders, courtyards swept clean, stories altered by conquest, names abandoned because no one copied them again. History is not only what survived, it's also what failed to survive. This is especially important when thinking about strange beings and ancient creation. A hybrid figure might be named in a lost story, or it might never have had a fixed story at all. An animal symbol might have carried local meaning that no surviving school text explains. A broken myth might have contained a detail that would change interpretation, or perhaps it contained nothing dramatic, only a routine phrase, a repetition, a prayer, a title, a name. Lost does not tell us what it lost. That's the hard boundary. You stand beside a shelf of fragments. Each one is numbered. Each one is handled with care. Some contain only a few signs, a ration, a name, a god, a place, a verb without its sentence, waiting like a lonely tool on a floor. To most eyes, such fragments appear dull. To a patient reader, they may hold connections. A single sign can identify a text. A repeated phrase can join two broken pieces. A divine name can shift a whole interpretation. Tiny things matter. The ancient scribes knew this too. A wedge pressed too shallowly might be misread. A copied line might preserve an older mistake. A student might misunderstand an archaic phrase. A later scribe might adapt a myth for a new god or city. The record is not a frozen block of truth. It is a living chain of hands, each one capable of preserving and distorting at once. Perhaps that is why silence feels so alive. It is not merely absence. It is the echo of handling. The scholarly debate also concerns what kind of truth myths are meant to preserve. A damaged creation text may not be valuable because it reports an event in the modern sense. It may be valuable because it shows how ancient people structured meaning. Who serves whom? What is divine power? Why does disasters happen? Why are humans mortal? Why are kings authorized? Why do animals and monsters crowd the edges of sacred art? These questions survive even when lines are lost. The questions may be older than the tablets themselves. Your hand hovers over the glass, unable to touch the clay. The missing corner remains beyond recovery. No amount of longing can restore it. That is strangely calming. The past has boundaries. It is not yours to complete however you wish. It can be approached, studied, imagined, and honoured, but not fully possessed. The broken tablet teaches restraint. It also teaches wonder, because what survives is still astonishing. A reed pressed into clay thousands of years ago still reaches your mind. A city gone to ruin still speaks through a copied list. A myth shaped in temple schools still raises questions beside a modern bed at night. A fragment about creation still makes humanity feel young, made, watched, burdened, and mysterious. What the tablets never say may matter as much as what they do say. They never plainly say that every species was manufactured by the Anunnaki. They never hand over a full hidden manual of creation. They never remove the need for interpretation. They never let the listener escape uncertainty. Instead, they leave spaces where symbols breathe, spaces where scholars debate, spaces where fringe dreams grow, spaces where a tired mind can drift between fact and possibility, without forcing either one to conquer the other. The archive darkens, the lamps are being lowered, the fragments lie in rows, each one carrying its small portion of survival. Outside, night gathers over the modern world, just as it once gathered over mud-brick roofs, temple courts, reed beds, and sleeping animals in ancient Sumer. You listen to the silence of the clay. It does not feel empty now. It feels like a door left almost closed, with a thin line of darkness showing beneath it. Perhaps nothing waits beyond. Perhaps only more broken tablets. Perhaps a story once known by a scribe, forgotten by his grandson, buried by accident, and lifted again too late to be whole. That is enough. The ancient record does not give certainty. It gives an invitation, and in the missing lines, the broken signs, the names half preserved, and the creatures half understood, you begin to feel the deepest mystery of all. Human history is not a finished book resting open before you. It is a clay archive in dim light, where every answer carries a fracture, and every silence asks you to listen more slowly. Night settles around the tablets, and the clay seems to dream beneath the glass. You stand in the final quiet, where museum halls have emptied and the present has lowered its voice. The lights remain gentle, not bright enough to wake the dead, only bright enough to keep watch. In their pale glow, the tablets look smaller than the questions they have carried. They are cracked, brown, uneven, and easily overlooked by anyone hurrying towards something shinier. Yet here the oldest mystery waits without impatience. The dream beneath the clay is not one answer. It is a gathering of images, each one half buried and half awake. Divine workers in the mud, a body shaped from earth, blood or breath mixed into matter. Strange sages rising from waters, beasts carved beside temples. Hybrid guardians curled on seals, kings reigning in impossible time. A flood crossing the world like a knife drawn through memory. No single fragment explains them all. Together, they create a mood deeper than explanation. Modern scholarship confirms that Sumerian and Mesopotamian texts preserve some of the earliest known written reflections on creation, kingship, divine order, human labour, flood memory, and sacred service. Researchers at Oxford, Yale, Chicago, Pennsylvania, and other major centres continue to study these materials through language, archaeology, literature, and history. Their work does not reveal a clean hidden list of every species shaped by the Anunnaki. It reveals something older than that claim, and perhaps more haunting. It reveals a world where humanity was never alone in meaning. You look at the tablet surface and notice how the wedge marks resemble tiny doors. Some doors open into myths, some open into rations, some open into royal praise, some open into arguments over fields, workers, offerings, and debts. The ancient world did not separate the sacred from the practical with modern neatness. A god could stand behind a grain account, a myth could explain labour, a list could preserve a cosmos. That is the strange beauty of clay. It holds the heavenly and the ordinary together. A quirky fringe thought lingers at the edge of the room. Perhaps, some would say, all these fragments truly are the remains of a lost record, One where divine beings tried many forms before humans finally rose from the clay. Perhaps the animals, sages, monsters, and hybrids are distorted memories of earlier created kinds. Perhaps the flood erased the evidence, and only symbols survived. It is an alluring dream, with a shadowed corridor and excellent lighting, but the clay asks for softer steps. The surviving texts do not prove that dream. They do not name every species as an experiment. They do not let modern certainty enter wearing ancient robes. Yet they also do not make humanity simple. They place human life inside a layered system of gods, animals, kings, waters, monsters, temples, labour, and time before time. The official scholarly caution does not drain the mystery. It protects it from becoming cheap. The open debate, stated carefully, is not whether fantasy should replace history. It is how myth, ritual, art, and administration together shape the Mesopotamian understanding of existence. Did creation stories justify human labour, explain divine dependence, preserve older oral memory, or dramatise the burdens of city life? Did hybrid beings mainly guard thresholds, express divine power, or carry echoes of older mythic patterns? Did flood traditions remember real disasters, theological judgment, or both? The questions remain alive because the evidence is rich, partial, and stubbornly ancient. You stand quietly with those questions. No answer hurries forward. The dream beneath the clay is the feeling that human origins are not a bright line, but a dim passage. The Sumerians and their inheritors imagined creation as process, order, burden, and relationship. They imagined humans as made for service, yet capable of memory. They imagined animals as useful and sacred. They imagined beings between forms as guardians of difficult borders. They imagined kingship descending from above, then passing from city to city like a dangerous gift. This is not a laboratory record. It is a sacred map of responsibility. In that map, every creature has weight. The sheep feeds the temple, the bull opens the field, the fish hides wisdom in water, the bird crosses the sky, the serpent carries danger and renewal through dust. The human digs canals, prepares offerings, writes tablets, fears death, and asks why the gods need anything at all. Perhaps that question is the true human species, not the upright body, not the clever hand. The question, a being made to serve, begins to wonder. A creature shaped from earth looks upward and notices the stars. A worker counted in rations becomes the keeper of myths. A voice meant for hymns also learns complaint. A hand made for baskets presses signs into clay and sends uncertainty into the future. That may be what no divine system can entirely control. The clay creature remembers. You imagine the first scribe pressing a creation line into a tablet, unaware of the long sleep ahead. He does not know that empires will pass over his world. He does not know that languages will fall silent, that cities will become mounds, that statues will lose noses, that seals will be lifted from dust by people wearing gloves. He does not know that his marks will be read under electric light by scholars, dreamers, skeptics, and listeners drifting towards sleep. He only presses the sign. The clay receives it. The dream begins its long descent. Around the museum room, the artifacts seem to form a silent assembly. The tablets do not speak with one voice, but they do gather around one deep unease. Humanity appears late, made, placed, and burdened. Before human memory stands a crowded darkness of divine powers, waters, animals, sages, kings, and forms that do not fit cleanly into daylight categories. Long before recorded history, the stories say, there was already order. Long before the first modern question, there was already work. Long before humanity claimed the centre may have belonged elsewhere. That is not a comfortable thought, but it is a calming one in its own way. It frees you from the pressure of being first, final, or complete. The tablet suggests that human life is part of a much older weave. You are not the whole design, you're one thread, warm and brief, carrying memory through the dark. The glass reflects your face again. It hovers over the clay like a second tablet not yet written. Your own life is full of systems you inherited, languages you did not invent, questions you did not begin, and duties you did not choose. The ancient stories feel distant, yet they turn quietly toward you. What shaped you? What do you serve? What do you remember? The Anunnaki remain in shadow, not as solved engineers, not as discarded fantasy, but as names from an ancient religious world where divine power had structure and human life had purpose. The so-called species remain uncertain too, shifting between animals, symbols, sacred metaphors, and modern imagination. The tablets do not reveal every answer. They reveal the shape of a longing to know whether humanity was intended, a longing to know whether other forms stood near the beginning, a longing to know whether creation was love, labour, accident, command, or compromise. Perhaps the old clay cannot answer because the question is still being formed. Perhaps every generation presses its own wedge into the wet surface of the past. Perhaps the story is not yet complete. The hall grows dimmer. The tablets rest under glass. Outside, the modern world continues, bright and hurried, carrying its own myths without always naming them. Inside, the clay sleeps, and beneath its broken lines, the dream remains. Not proof, not dismissal, a quiet threshold. You leave it there, where ancient dust and modern breath meet for a moment, and the oldest human question waits patiently in the dark, still shaped like clay, still warm with the possibility of a hand. And now, as the images begin to soften, you can let the temple walls fade into moonlit earth, the rivers loosen their silver paths, the reed beds bend beneath a gentler wind. No king calls from his throne now, no scribe corrects a sign, no god demands a basket of grain. Only the night remains, broad and patient, holding the ancient world like a bowl of dark water. You may release the questions for a while. The tablets will keep them safely. They have kept them through flood, fire, silence, and forgetting. They can keep them a little longer while your breathing slows and the room around you becomes quiet. The clay does not need you to solve it tonight. The old signs do not need to be forced open. They can rest as fragments, and fragments can still be beautiful. A broken line may remain broken. A missing name may remain unnamed. A strange creature carved in miniature may sleep inside its curve of stone, guarding only the doorway into dreams. Somewhere in that dream, the rivers of Sumer move beneath the stars, mud brick walls cool after sunset, sheep settle beside temple pens. A lamp burns low in a tablet house, while a young scribe leans over wet clay and presses one last sign before sleep takes him. He does not know you are listening. He does not need to know. The night carries both of you. Euphus in this later world, he in that vanished one. Between you lies clay, silence, and the soft persistence of memory. Let it be enough. Let the ancient waters grow still. Let the gods retreat into their high, shadowed chambers. Let the black-headed people rest from their labour. Let the hidden beings return to the edges of the seal, where they wait without hunger and without hurry. And perhaps, somewhere beneath all stories, the first clay body breathes again, not to work now, not to serve, but only to dream under a dark and merciful sky. End of script. Good night.